A few words from the author. To withhold the past is to withhold the present is to withhold the future. The world's remote past is buried, surviving as spared remnants of cataclysms that periodically inflict the earth. Much is lost, forgotten, or distorted. The book you are about to read is the culmination of my life's research of ancient world history. My obsession is the exploration of lost historical mysteries. Ancient myths, I believe, often encode historical events that occurred before, during, and after global cataclysms that wiped out nearly all life on Earth on at least two relatively recent known occasions. One ended the last ice age about 17,000 years ago, and the other unleashed the biblical blood about 12,500 years ago. And what about the innumerable global myths, unexplainable ancient structures like the Giza pyramids, Nazca lines, and countless others, gods, God, religions, empires, wars, and the real identity of Earth's historic rulers? To find out more, read what I offer you here. A word of caution: exploring Earth's remote past can reveal political and religious controversies. So, proceed with an open mind. This book contains factual historical data derived from extensive research. Data from remote historical periods often contain heretofore unknown details that must be pieced together to provide a meaningful context. My intention was not theoretical text about historical facts, mysteries, and anomalies in a fictional format, a factual novel. In the context of a story, I have attempted to explore and decipher the truths behind important and often forgotten or misunderstood world events. I like to call it lost history. How much of this book is fact, and how much fiction? Allow me to ask to write yet another vague mythology. Rather, I present same question about our indoctrinated historical or religious belief systems. How can anyone ascertain the exact truth in such remote historical periods? I leave it to your judgment, common sense, and intuitive inner wisdom to sense your way among what once was, what might have been, and what is fiction. I hope, nevertheless, you will find the book at once entertaining and educational. I encourage you to further explore the mentioned names and places. Some of the historical characters in the book went by different names during their lives, but to avoid confusion I use the more recent, often Greek or Indo-European, popular names familiar to us. I hope you enjoy this book as much as I enjoyed researching and writing it. Keep an open mind, focus, and please read slowly. Travel through time and place as you rediscover Earth's lost history. The starting voyage. The drop wept, I am separated from the sea. The sea laughed, saying, it is all us. A Sufi verse. The only universal constant is change. Buddha, this revolving cosmos we revere, consciousness a spark of its light, bearer of that light is the sun, around which we whirl in awe. Omar Khayyam, 11th century AD. In a not too distant future, on a high mountaintop, somewhere on Earth. Wow, they all sighed as another brilliant whiteness streaked across the heavens. Not recognizing a shooting star, our tiny friends pondered whether they could ever attain such grace, power, and freedom. When will we be freed to join the source? One asked. On an early spring evening high on a snow-capped mountain peak overlooking hundreds of others, in a world of purity and graceful solitude, our frozen friends anxiously awaited their freedom. They all knew of their source, the ocean, with its majestic vastness, calm, and might, covering most of the planet. The elders in the ice cap talked about it endlessly. They said the spring warmth would soon set some of the luckier ones free to flow to the ocean, the source. The winter seemed eternal. Frozen in suspended animation, they wondered about their destiny. They didn't know when or how, but innately sensed that freedom and union with the source would soon become real. Invisible forces bound our two tiny friends, hydrogen and oxygen, together as long as they could remember within a frozen water molecule. They shared an existence and an insatiable desire to understand, to strive for the freedom to reach the source. Everyone talked of union with the mighty ocean, but they were all stuck in frozen ice crystals atop the mountain peak, millions and millions of frozen crystals, as far as our two friends could see. Translucent ice crystal lattices extended infinitely in all directions. Some rambled on about unrelated issues, some complained, some jostled for room or crack to relieve the weight of the millions above them. The elders watched everything in a state of quiet contemplation. Our heroes were next to such a one. What will happen now? Hydrogen asked the elders. If you are worthy, the spring warmth will soon free you to join the source. When? Oxygen asked. When it happens, you will know. How will it all be? Hydrogen asked. And how long will it take to reach the source? The journey is long and difficult. Many obstacles lead to oblivion and decay. The path is no longer clear or safe. There was a time long ago when the world was pure, when most of us reached the source. All that is changed now. Now danger, misery, pollution, and decay block the way. Some do not wish to follow the path anymore. We are content here in this serene mountain peak ice cap, far from the rest of the world. Perplexing beings lurk there, and some need us for nourishment. In bygone eras there was purity and harmony. The word was better, but everything has changed. Hydrogen and oxygen thought about what the elders said. The journey to the source was perilous, but the alternative numb comfort in an isolated, frozen landscape could never satisfy their curiosity. The risks associated with finding their destination would not deter them. The elders moved slightly to relieve the pressure from above, making a deep screeching sound, and resumed. If you wish to undertake the journey, you must take care not to depart from the path to the source. It is no longer simple or safe. Many perish on the way, absorbed by the forces of darkness. Hydrogen and oxygen looked at each other, not in fear or doubt but with determination. They were ready to take the path, to reach the source just as soon as the spring warmth released them. Wow, they sighed again, as yet another streak of heavenly light brightened their burning aspiration. Many more cold days and nights passed while our heroes anxiously waited and questioned the eldest about freedom and the journey to the source. Then one day, large flocks of birds appeared from the south. They seemed to be on a mass pilgrimage to their source. The elder noted that it was a signal. They might soon be moving. Some were enthusiastic. Some were hesitant. Others wondered whether they, like the elders, should stay put in the relative safety and isolation of their familiar surroundings. Why bother, one elder asked, when we could face much hardship and misery or risk rotting in some dirty cesspool of worldly decay? It may be boring here, but at least we are safely isolated. Not our two friends. They looked bravely at each other. Without talking, they gazed anxiously up at the sky, where they sensed a warming sensation, the bright sunlight's heat. Some time later they noticed that they were near the top layers of their icebound world. Those above them had been leaving slowly. Would they also be worthy? It will be soon now, the elders told our eager friends from below. With the upper layers of ice now melting, our tiny heroes felt the sun's intense, blanketing warmth increasing above them. Slowly, the heat loosened the ice crystal that held them. Among the commotion, they began to experience a freer state and movement. They bid goodbye to the elders, still advising them nervously to be careful along the way. First slowly, then more rapidly they flowed freely to join others sliding over other still frozen ice crystals. They heard those left beneath shouting encouragement, concern, or caution. At last, their journey was underway. Our excited friends were part of a tiny stream of ice-cold water flowing down the mountain. They gained speed and strength as they frequently merged with others. Soon they joined a foaming mountain stream, screaming excitedly as it tumbled down the rocky slopes to merge with a mighty, roaring river. They had never seen such a thing before. Others told our friends that the mighty flow was indeed headed toward the source, the ocean. An overwhelming power poured from everyone's collective determination to attain the same goal. They moved rocks and cut through or bypassed mightier obstacles. With every obstruction removed, every challenge overcome, they felt stronger than the solid, idle, purposeless lumps of mass they pushed out of their way. A clear purpose drove them forward, whereas the obstructions sat idly, doing nothing. The growing torrent of water was unstoppable. Surely, reaching the source was just a matter of time. Soon they approached lowland plains covered by an endless mosaic of inhabited human villages and their feeble-looking farms and livestock. Beyond the riverside settlements, the arid flat lands spread in every direction as far as they could see. Out there, humans and animals huddled around the river for survival. The scene was increasingly dreadful, the earth scorched, the trees dead, the half-dead farm animals staggering aimlessly. Here and there in the distance, monstrous factory chimneys spewed filthy clouds of black smoke. Rusted, broken pipes poured stinking toxic sludge and sewage into the pristine river. Nasty insects covered the surface of stagnant cesspools at the river's edge. Farms nursed malnourished, chemically infested plants, struggling in the parched, exhausted soil. Sickness, famine, poverty, destruction, and decay filled a world of desperate life forms clinging to survival. Amid unrelieved blight, nothing seemed sacred, neither life, nature, harmony nor death. Perhaps, the elders were right, someone said. Maybe we should have stayed in isolated comfort. But why don't these creatures search for their source? Our two friends asked aloud. Why do they stagnate in such decay and disillusionment? Everyone had questions, but no answers. Another colleague in the river answered loudly, do not trouble yourselves with these hopeless entities. Why should you care at all? Once we reach the mighty ocean, such pathetic misery will not concern us. Our two tiny friends began to understand that the outside world held many unknowns. Why was there misery there and not at the source? Why so much confusion, misery, and darkness here, yet tranquility there? Why the difference? They wondered and stared at their surroundings. If the ocean showed them neither the problem nor the answer, might there not be a higher wisdom elsewhere? But what? And where? The questions reinforced their yearning for comprehension, but they lingered in confusion much longer, as the river roared past one bleak landscape after another. Speeding past another obstacle, our friends spotted a devastated human settlement by the river. The human occupants appeared destitute and hungry, since their crops had failed from disease. The adults were gone on a desperate search for another day's sustenance rations. The elders were too weak and the children too malnourished and inexperienced to affect their hopeless destiny. Slime, insects, and the stench of decay and death covered a drying puddle of water in the village reservoir. In the midst of their hopelessness, the inhabitants crouched about, quietly enduring. Under the shadow of a dead olive tree, our two friends spotted a young girl and her infant brother, sheltered from the sun's punishing rays. The girl wept quietly, while her infant brother licked the teardrops from her face in consolation, or maybe just thirst. We should help. They are thirsty and dying, our friends cried. The river roared that petty feelings and concerns were insignificant, a waste of time, no concern for superior beings like them. Not service to miserable barbarians, but the ocean's grandeur was their rightful destiny. Why bother with obviously inferior creatures? Despite the objections, at the first bend, our two heroes Hydrogen and Oxygen and some other compassionate ones left the mighty river as a little stream and headed toward the destitute children. They were anxious, but they were intuitively convinced that the harmony and wisdom associated with the source would not condone insensitivity and indifference. Nervously, quietly, our friends approached the crying children. As the sparkling stream reached them, the girl joyfully dragged her exhausted little body toward it, filled her dirty hands with the fresh water and carried it to her brother's mouth and then her own. Before they knew it, the stream carried our friends past the village. Pulled by gravity, they fell into a dry ravine, flowing farther and farther from the river that grew a distant dream. As they beheld the nightmare before them, they trembled with fear. None had ever imagined, or been warned about such an arid place. Perhaps none of the elders had ever seen such a thing. Before them as far as they could see spread a desolate desert. They saw no ice caps, rivers, streams, trees, or even sickly life forms, nothing but scorched sand drifting along. The occasional dry tumbleweed rolled about like a condemned ghost seeking redemption in a hellish realm. "There is certainly no ocean out there," one said hopelessly. "See what a mess you got us into," yelled another who had followed our friends away from the river. The fearful commotion followed them as they descended farther and farther until finally they settled into a cavity in the desert floor. Unable to move or turn back, they were completely stuck. "Now we're really done for. We're all going to rot into oblivion," just as the elders warned, one cried. "This certainly cannot be the reward for compassion," Oxygen whispered to Hydrogen. "I wonder if we will ever see the source." At that bleak moment they heard a firm, calm voice from below. "What source are you talking about?" They looked down among the grains of sand at the bottom of the pond they formed, and saw a resilient, shiny being staring back at them. "I am Silicone," the voice continued. "How long have you been stuck out here?" Oxygen asked. "The winds brought me here and deposited me a very long time ago, but I have not always been here. Originally, long ago, I was part of an important ancient place. I learned a lot there." "Have you ever seen the source?" Hydrogen asked. "Is the ocean as beautiful as they say?" Silicone smiled. "Yes, indeed, the ocean is very beautiful. But why do you call it the source?" "Because that is where everything came from," someone said. "It is the source of all." Silicone laughed loudly. "Forgive me, my inexperienced friends. The way some mistake perception for reality always amuses me." "What do you mean?" another asked. "Let me introduce myself. I was not always part of an insignificant piece of sand. About 13,000 years ago I was part of an important crystal. As a quartz crystal, we stored information. Magnificent lights and energy beams shone through us. We could learn and memorize the myriads of information the beams transmitted. I was embedded in one such crystal in the great library." Everyone waited in silence, as Silicone gazed at the distant horizon a while. "You see, the true source is really the source of all creation, of everything that exists. The ocean is part of it, but there is much more to it than that. The source is a complex concept. You wouldn't understand. I certainly never have." "What is the source then, and where can we find it?" Oxygen asked enthusiastically. "Why do you want to find it? Do you have any idea what a proposition that is? In my lifetime of many millennia, I have witnessed events, people, and much misfortune. No one understands or cares anymore. Look at the mess around you. Do you think you can make a difference? What do you seek? What gave you the idea you can find the source? Even if you're lucky and worthy, will you recognize or understand the source if you find it?" The sun disappeared below the western horizon, like a wounded and dying god surrendering Earth to the forces of darkness. Yet countless stars and the crescent moon's light illuminated our friends' bleak surroundings, hinting that even in absolute darkness, light still glimmers. A breeze spread the desert sand around gently. The stars' reflection on the surface of the little pond looked like fluttering white lace. The crescent moon could have been a wavering mirage of a faltering horned god. If Hydrogen picked up the train of though, as you learned in that library, the source is the origin of all creation, then it must have all the answers. Perhaps a way to improve the world. Here we go again. Haven't you done enough damage, some others moaned. It was your dreamy ideals got us into this puddle of death. Death is just awakening. Silicone announced to the puzzled crowd. I learned that. You'll see. Be patient. As for you two eager ones, let me explain. I do not know what or where the source of all creation is, but I learned that it is the highest truth, the embodiment of the greatest wisdom, all-encompassing, complete, eternal, and not easily perceived by just anyone. But, we will not be just anyone. We will earn that privilege, no matter what it takes. Do you know where to find the source? Oxygen mused. No, Silicone replied, That is beyond my knowledge. When I was part of the Great Library, I heard a rumor of an ancient place where the answer can be found, a place called the Chamber of Destiny that supposedly guards the universal sign. Yes, I believe that's what they were called. I remember hearing about them from the elders in the library, who had been there much longer than I was. I believe the universal sign encoded some mysterious secret that reveals the source of all creation. How can we get to the Chamber of Destiny? Hydrogen and oxygen spoke at the same time. Everyone roared with laughter at the naive question, all except silicone. My eager friends, that library is long gone. The great flood that wiped out everything on the planet over 12,500 years ago destroyed it. For millennia before that, the Earth was quite different. Where we see deserts, lush forests grew, while thick layers of ice and glaciers covered other places. Then something changed everything. Gigantic quantities of ice began to thaw. The seas rose slowly at first, then suddenly and catastrophically during immense floods that destroyed much of what existed on the face of the earth. Nearly all life was wiped out. Entire civilizations disappeared from history. By the time it was all over, the oceans had risen substantially. I wonder if the remains of some of those lost civilizations are still there on the sunken coasts? The floods destroyed everything before them, including my library. All of us who were its crystal homeless vagabonds. Washed around, ground down, and spread all over the planet. When at last I was on land as a part of this grain of sand, the winds blew me about and deposited me here in this desert. All information about the Chamber of Destiny and the universal sign was lost, along with other ancient knowledge in the library, lost forever. Databanks have since become over the millennia, we were since then, the world has been like an orphan, growing up alone, lost, and disillusioned. Yet there may be a way. Silicone murmured after a long pensive pause. If we could go back in time, long ago before the great floods and visit the great library's crystal archives, we could find the exact location of the Chamber of Destiny and reveal the secret of the universal sign. While you have gone back in time, could you please drop us back into the river? Everyone burst into laughter at this cynical comment. What do you mean, going back in time? Hydrogen asked. How could that be possible? The universe comprises many dimensions. We perceive only the physical dimensions, but there are many more, invisible to three-dimensional physical earthlings. There are other dimensions on Earth, and different types of powerful energy fields that cannot be readily detected. I cannot give you an easy explanation. What I reveal to you is information that passed through me when I was part of the library's crystal databanks. You see, the higher dimensional energy fields cross each other at specific places on Earth, often amplifying each other and rarely creating time-space vortices. I once came across a map of such energy fields. When they intersect, they designate areas on Earth where powerful events regularly take place like earthquakes, electromagnetic anomalies, volcanoes, shifting magnetic fields, and so on. I recall the location of one such place, not so far from here. It is high in the caves and subterranean tunnels of the Andes Mountains. One special cave is where many earthly energy fields intersect. Within it lies a rare time-space vortex, a portal, and a sort of a gateway to multidimensional time-space coordinates. If my memory serves, the portal somehow transports objects across multidimensional pathways and into other perceived time-space coordinates. You see, within the physical realm, beings like us can perceive only three-dimensional space. And time, of course. Time is a one-directional variable, moving in one direction at a constant speed. We can move through space, but we cannot control the direction and pace of time. But multidimensional pathways can arbitrarily change the relative positions of time and space. As physical entities, we cannot understand that, yet it might be the only way. If we could get to the Andes portal cave and transport back to the time before the flood, find the great library archives and the Chamber of Destiny, then maybe we can learn about the universal sign. Wow, that's a challenging adventure. "We're ready to go," hydrogen and oxygen announced. Everyone laughed again. "We can't even get out of this rotting puddle you got us into. And now you want to go back in time to find some long-gone sign to unlock the secrets of existence and the universe." Some time later, through the pond's surface they saw the reddish desert dawn sky, the morning sunlight illuminating the desolate landscape once more. They saw nothing but sand, rock, the rolling tumbleweed, and no other body of water. The night of wild imagining and dreamy conversations gave way to renewed awareness of their hopeless situation. Would they wither away out there without ever seeing the ocean or even the old roaring river? Yet Silicone managed a smile. "There is much about creation we don't understand. There may be hope for you yet, my friends. Just be patient and have faith in the wisdom of the universe." No one responded until oxygen and hydrogen whispered to Silicone. "We want to find the source and all its wisdom. That's all we have wanted since we were stuck in the mountain. If we ever get out of here, we pledge to dedicate our existence to the cause." "I knew you would say that," Silicone said, "but I warn you. The journey will be arduous. If that is our destiny, so be it." "Very well then," Silicone said. "I'm getting bored around here. Why not? I'll come along. Plus, you're going to need my knowledge of the past." "Now," Oxygen concluded, "we need to figure out how to get to that Andean mountain cave." Their enthusiasm reassured Silicone. Just then, the sun's heavenly rays pierced the gloom and cast their intense light and warm embrace onto the pond. Before they knew what was happening, the sun's warming caress brought them to a state of exalted levitation. Freed and weightless, the vaporized water particles floated upward into the vast blue skies. "Magic! Miracle!" they rejoiced, as they departed skyward. Before hydrogen and oxygen rose to leave the pond, they embraced Silicone. Together they floated upward, as the sun's rays and the force of the wind carried them up, forward, and away at great speed. They soon joined small patches of cloud and sailed forth with them. None uttered a word. All the while, Silicone monitored the geography of the land passing below them. And then there it was, far below. They spotted the river in the distance, just as they left it. It roared along arrogantly, pushing rocks about and rounding obstacles, ceaselessly twisting its way toward the ocean. Joy, then silent awe overtook them, because still farther the outline of the ocean appeared on the distant horizon, a blue boundary to another worldly dimension. It was more beautiful, more serene, and grander than they imagined. Finally everyone understood, they had never been lost or hopeless. They were only experiencing another dimension of their existence within the universe, a realization others in the river might never perceive. Unlike when they were in the river, they no longer felt themselves superior. They felt humbler and wiser, possessed of a deeper sense of connection with the rest of creation. Perhaps they were one step closer to the source of all creation. The others looked at our three friends as they smiled and waved goodbye. Then, gathering together as drops of rain, they fell towards the roaring waves of the great blue ocean. For all others the journey had ended. The roaring winds propelled the three heroes of our continuing story along their starting voyage. Ice, fire, and flood. To begin again like children, in complete ignorance of what had happened before. Plato quoting the ancient legends of the Egyptian priests of Heliopolis. And Ahura Mazda spoke unto Yuma, Yuma the fair, upon the material world a fatal winter is about to descend, that shall bring a vehement, destroying frost, and snow of great abundance. 10 months of winter are there now, 2 months of summer, and these are cold as the water, cold as the earth, cold as the trees. There all around falls deep snow, that is the direst plague. From the Iranian Avestic scriptures. Abandoned by the gods, men were driven from their hearths and the human race was swept from the surface of the earth. The earth itself was beginning to lose its shape. Already the stars were coming adrift from the sky and falling into the gaping void. Then all the rivers, all the seas rose and overflowed. They swelled and boiled over all things. The earth sank beneath the giant cert that set the entire earth on fire. The world was no more than an immense furnace. Flames spurted from fissures in the rocks, and everywhere there was the hissing of steam. All living things and all plant life were destroyed. Teutonic myth. The first world was destroyed as a punishment for human misdemeanors by an all-consuming fire that came from above and below. The second world ended when the terrestrial globe toppled from its axis and everything was covered with ice. The third world ended in a universal flood. The present world is the fourth. Its fate will depend on whether or not its inhabitants behave in accordance with creation. Hopi myth. We have invented nothing. Picasso on seeing the cave paintings at Lascaux, southern France. Our three friends floated in the atmosphere for days, heading for the Andes Mountains, catching different winds to move along the right direction. Silicone's resourcefulness and knowledge of Earth's geography, geology, and atmospheric meteorology were indispensable. The landscape spread underneath them, a giant tapestry of desolation and human desperation. One overpopulated human settlement after another soiled the planet. Everywhere upon the scarred earth, waste and toxicity poisoned the land, the water, and the air. Here and there, however, our friends spotted Mother Earth's sanctuary in isolated hidden forests, marshlands, or mountain lakes, where she tended hidden nurseries of all but extinct flora and fauna. Why the contrast? Were humans not of this world? Our friends wondered. What they saw and the numerous questions that arose hardened their resolve to pursue their mission. They discussed their observations and what they would do when they reached the time-space transfer portal. They began calling it the transportal for short. Then they became aware of a pair of airborne strangers hovering and watching them. Noticing that they were noticed, the strangers approached hesitantly, and one said, "Forgive our intrusion. But, we could not help observe that instead of leaving us as rain like the rest, you have stayed up here for quite a while. We followed you. We wanted to know what you are up to. We overheard some of your conversations. We are very curious about it all. Allow me to introduce us. I am Nitrogen, and this is my old friend Helium. We are what you find mostly here in the atmosphere along with oxygen and hydrogen." The strangers' courtesy reassured our friends. They talked a long time about their experiences, and their ambitious plans and their destination. In turn, Nitrogen and Helium told them about the increasing atmospheric pollution, rising temperatures, increased radiation due to a shrinking Earth's protective ozone shield, as well as strange meteorological patterns of storms, hurricanes, and tornadoes. Such unprecedented conditions were a big problem for all who dwelt in the atmosphere, and they pondered the causes. "Would you let us come along?" Nitrogen asked. "We would very much like to join your journey. The way we see it, if we do not seek help from a higher power, our habitat is doomed. And we have a lot of buddies up here. Perhaps we can be helpful," Helium added. Cautiously, Silicone embraced their offer. "You must consider the potential dangers that may lie in our path. Your knowledge of the winds and the atmosphere is certainly welcome." The new friends made the trip to the Andes a breeze as favorable winds sped them along. Finally, they arrived in a reassuringly pure and harmonious natural world. In the distance spread the majestic Andes, their twisting north-south alignment a timeless axis of serenity, like a giant serpent asleep. Before they reached the mountains, Silicone took them to hover over the wide, flat desert floor of the Peruvian Nazca Plain. Below them, hundreds of lines, geometric shapes, and beautifully carved animal figures patterned the rocky desert. The scale was immense. The numerous intersecting lines were perfectly straight and traversed many miles, as if someone deliberately left a giant drawing or map, visible only from the air. Indeed, they realized that none of the patterns could be seen from the ground. Who carved such enigmatic geometric shapes and lines invisible to those creeping upon the Earth's surface? Why and for whom? Who did all this? Hydrogen asked. No one knows for certain, Silicone sighed. Records describe them as very ancient strips, and geometric shapes configure contains much information about the Earth. The ancients believed that if used three-dimensionally in conjunction with natural features nearby and on the scale of the adjacent topography, it becomes a giant address book. There are also other theories and secrets about the site I do not know about. The animal figures are much smaller and belong to a later time. They say the local inhabitants carved them a few thousand years ago. They probably denote the ancients' awareness of the plane's sacredness, and may be a sign of respect to those who mapped the original geometric layout. Some believe the people were trying to attract or communicate with their heavenly gods. Airborne gods evidently, Helium observed. What gods? The source. Oxygen asked. It's too complicated. We can talk about it later. But I can tell you why we're here. Certain information on the map identifies the exact location of the transportal. That's why we came. After studying the lines a while longer, Silicone said, I think I have it. We're ready to leave. As they approached, our friends gazed at the distant, towering Andes peaks. Hydrogen and oxygen recalled the elders in the ice cap, still frozen in the safety of their crystal lattices. Were they aware of the grave issues that confronted Earth? What would they think about the mission? Silicone monitored the landscape's coordinates, the lines, map that and topography until at last it said, according to my calculations, this must be it. Nitrogen and helium helped the winds deliver our friends to their destination. They stood before a small, barely visible cave near the top of a mountain peak, overgrown and hidden by tree roots. They entered without hesitation. Light dimmed as it passed through the maze of roots and shrubs over the cave's mouth. Floating dust and haze reflected the narrow beams to produce a hypnotic, translucent atmosphere. Here and there, a spider's web captured the light beams, appearing as illuminated fishing nets suspended in a dark ocean. Through the dim light they saw algae-like vegetation growing everywhere. Insects buzzed about, mocking fireflies as they passed through the light. The plants and insects seemed out of place in the high, dry, cold climate. Surely an alternative energy source was near. Silicone pointed to a deep cavity or well in the center of the cave, from which came a strange halo of bright white light. There was no vegetation near the well, just bare rocks. As our bewildered friends stared at the shining well, a fly unwittingly approached its mouth. Our friends watched with disbelief as the insect disappeared in a bright flash of light, as if stricken by lightning. It was their first encounter with the magical transportal. So what now? Helium asked at last. Should we go for the zap, or is there another method to this madness? According to my recollection, Silicone said, this place is a crossing point for multitudes of Earth's energy fields. My friends, we are witnessing Mother Earth's magical power. We have seen a brief reflection of the source. But I have not the slightest clue about the transportal's power. At that very instant, a voice came from a large white rock near the mouth of the well. Perhaps I can be of assistance. But first I would appreciate knowing who you are, where you come from, and where and what you seek. The stranger was Calcium. They spent some time telling their story and their destination. Calcium then gave them important information about the transportal. I have no specific scientific knowledge about it. I do recall that many thousands of years ago certain humanoid entities came to this cave and transported through time and space. I know nothing of the details of their mission or its outcome. But, before they entered the well, their leader instructed them to hold hands and remember his previous instructions, which of course I did not hear. Upon his signal, they jumped into the well altogether and disappeared from view. I overheard that the time-space lapse would last exactly 12 hours, something to do with Earth's orbit around the Sun. They could stay in their destination only when the Sun was invisible. Sure enough, 12 hours later they reappeared and left without speaking a word. That was the only time I saw this well used, except for the occasional unfortunate insect. That is all I can tell you, but I really would like to go with you. I have stared and wondered about this well for too many millennia. Welcome aboard, Silicone said for the rest. Our friends discussed other things they did not know about the transportal, especially where and when it might transport them. Although they did not know how to determine their time-place destination as that group of humanoids apparently did, they were glad that they would be back in 12 hours. Also, they knew at least that they should embrace, concentrate, and jump in at the same time. That sounded easy enough. For now, Silicone cautioned, I cannot tell you exactly where the library was. For that, we need to travel to a point long before the floods. But since we don't know exactly how to use the transportal, we'll have to depend on trial and error or sheer luck. With Silicone's caveat in mind, they approached the well. They saw the abyss to which they were about to entrust their fate. It was a bottomless pit, lit by a whitish-blue halo and buzzing with multitudes of strange sparks. None of them had seen anything like it before. It had no familiar physical dimensions. Indeed, it appeared quite unearthly. They all looked at each other, nodded, embraced, and leaped into the unknown. After what seemed like a brief lost moment, they found themselves in a large cave, dazed by a flash of brilliant white light. They were all there, and still together, relieved to be conscious and in one piece. They looked around curiously and found another strange perplexity. They were inside a very large cave with a fairly level floor and a very high ceiling. Here and there, black soot covered the ceiling, an indication of regular indoor fires. They peeked outside through the narrow entrance. It was unusually dark. No visible stars, no moonlight, just a pitch-black night sky. Either all heavenly bodies had forsaken Earth, or clouds covered them. A powerful storm raged, like none they had ever seen. Only frequent thunder and lightning interrupted the howling wind. Intense rains and black bituminous hail balls smashed anything in their path. A foul-smelling smoke thickened the air. The wind roared through the cave's mouth, an emissary of the symphony of horrors outside. I'm glad that hole had enough sense to land us inside the cave. Helium murmured. Within the cave, many human families huddled around numerous small fires. They wore torn, dirty animal skins or unfinished leather. They were dirty, frightened, weak, and desperate. The men went around, handing out tiny pieces of smoked meat and dried berries to the women, who clutched their hungry, crying children. A few skinny canines sat by the fires, gnawing the bones of large animals and jumping at the thunder and lightning. Beside the small bonfires was a larger central fire that illuminated a tall flat wall in the center of the cave. A roughly built scaffold of wooden platforms and ladders gave access to the higher parts of the wall. All along its surface were charcoal drawings and symbols that Silicone recognized at once. They were linguistic symbols of people who lived around 17,000 years ago on the northern plains of Asia. They were looking at an improvised writing board. An old man spoke to a few dozen young children as he wrote with charcoal on the cave wall. It appeared to be a makeshift classroom. In another corner, a few of the older males and females gathered around a fire. They were tall, fair-skinned, and their shining blue eyes radiated intelligence. Despite their pathetic surroundings, they neither looked nor behaved like savages. They talked busily, drawing lines and symbols on the dirt floor, and marking on and reading from wooden tablets. They pored over a map made of elaborate lines and stone and wood markers in the dirt floor. Our friends approached the heated discussion. Understanding certain phrases of their language, Silicone translated. "We have to move soon and to the south," one man said. "We need to wait for the weather to calm down. We have to find out what the catastrophe has done to our homeland," a graying woman of obvious high stature replied. Another man, holding an elaborate staff shaped like a coiled serpent and appearing to be the chief of the group, spoke. "The catastrophe has changed everything we used to know. Nothing is the same. The animals either died or have disappeared. The forests have been ravaged. The few surviving trees have borne no fruit for 4 years. We do not know everything that has happened, but I agree. We need to move and soon. We are running out of food. The storms and floods have ruined everything. We haven't seen other survivors for months. It's dangerous out there, but we can't stay here starving and struggling like apes. The children are weak and restless. We have a duty to save them and our civilization. Much of our world is gone. Our cities, homes, schools, and temples, all destroyed. Look at us. When we die, what will our children and their children remember, living like scavenging animals? Will any of them know the glories of their ancestors, their heavenly gods, or their wonderful cities and temples? What will they recall of our anyone remember miserable children? They can't even deal with our efforts to educate them. They are afraid, cold, and hungry. The volcano smoke, ash, and lava are poisoning us. Most of the young ones will not live long enough to pass on what little we can teach them. Can't you see that our history is doomed? The older woman stopped the old chief's hopeless ramble calmly. Then we will have to do better than the best we can do. That will be our destiny, for as long as we survive. We have to use all our past wisdom and knowledge to ensure our children's survival. That's what our gods want us to do to preserve our legacy. We will send out an expedition to track migrating animals. We can follow their instincts to a safer place. As soon as the storms subside, I'll dispatch a few scouts. But the storms have been going on for over 6 months, another woman cried. Sciences, arts, and culture? Will the sacred wisdom? Look at the old matriarch looked sorrowfully at the children in their makeshift class and sighed, I wonder how much of our culture and civilization will survive the chaos and struggle? How much of the wisdom our gods gave us will be lost? What great catastrophe do they mean? Oxygen asked. The reply came from a few yards away. It was an unprecedented and unimaginable event. No one comprehends the immense scale of destruction. All sorts of turbulent events have followed the catastrophe that happened almost 4 years ago. They saw a totally black earthling, lodged in a charcoal writing stick one of the elders was using to take notes on a flat stone slate. Who are you? Oxygen asked. I am carbon. This planet's keeper of the sun's energy, Silicon recalled. Every life form on Earth is made partly of carbon. Its stored energy gives all processed organic matter, like wood, coal, and oil, their quality as fuel. Carbon affirmed. I see that you know a lot. Please accept my humble greetings. Can you tell us more about the catastrophe? Nitrogen asked. What I can tell you is that it happened and ended very suddenly. These people, whom I have accompanied for years, belonged to a much larger community. They lived in a fertile, forested land. I came from one such forest. Theirs was a lush, temperate world of rivers and lakes where countless herds of large, hairy mammals roamed. Finding food was the least of concerns. Life was an ongoing merry affair of harmony between nature, humans, and gods. For thousands of years, countless races and cultures evolved from such abundance. Many developed large civilized communities. Rivers flowed, seasons passed, festivities came and went, and they paid tribute to the gods for good fortune. Their children were reared lovingly in the community traditions and knowledge. They cared for their elders and buried the deceased respectfully. Only rare regional quarrels and tribal arguments disturbed their lives, conflicts usually limited in scope and resolved by councils of elders. Their problems were rarely related to survival or exploitation. Their gods taught that humanity must live in harmony with itself and nature. Disagreements were resolved amicably. They had lived that way for as long as anyone could remember. Excuse me for a second. The old human lifted the writing stick and scribbled something on a stone tablet. When the writing stick was again laid down, Carbon continued. Then one day all hell broke loose. It started with strange lights and colors in a cloudless blue sky. Then out of nowhere, storm clouds appeared on the horizon and rushed forward like a dark army, shooting lightning. The animals went mad, screamed and ran around. The sun's light failed, as if night had come. The winds became more and more violent and powerful. The atmosphere blew up and thundered. Strange atmospheric halos of light and constant lightning filled the sky. Animals and humans were sucked up into the air and disappeared. Howling winds uprooted giant trees and tossed them around like sticks. One lovely tree was my old home. Then countless giant tornado funnels formed. Like an army of black-booted infantry, they crushed and vaporized anything in their path. It went on for a few hours. Everyone ran for safety, trying to save their dear ones. Many were already dead when it happened. What happened? Hydrogen asked breathlessly. The catastrophe. The world turned sideways. What do you mean? I'm serious. The world seemed to turn on its side. Barely visible through the clouds, the sun seemed to slide across the sky. Moments later, horrendous winds blasted by with unimaginable force and speed. They audibly howled. Shock waves. Silicone gasped. I cannot make you imagine, Carbon went on, what I shall never forget. The ground shook violently for hours. The Earth's layers heaved, cracked, and shifted up or down. Giant fissures opened everywhere. Fire, ash, and smoke spewed from the ruptures. Immense earthquakes and volcanic eruptions continued for months until the winds, the storms, and the lightning grew monstrous. Trees and animals vaporized or burst into flames, roasted, turned to ashes, or just disappeared as if transported into an invisible dimension. Some time later, out of nowhere came the floods. Miles-high ocean waves rolled up the peaceful river valleys and lowland plains and washed away everything thousands of miles inland. They smashed, mangled, and uprooted all in their path. They carried water, mud, debris, and dead life forms. Only the highest altitudes were spared. Entire forests, animals, and people, indeed most of the world's life forms were obliterated. Whole civilizations either disappeared or found themselves reduced to a state of desperate survival. The humans you see here are among the few survivors. They have struggled to migrate to a safer refuge. They call themselves Aryans, after their old home, Aryanavija. I know the event you have described, Silicone interjected. The Great Library Archives described it in detail. It happened millennia before the flood event that destroyed my old library and cast me adrift. You mean there will be another flood? Another catastrophe? Carbon seemed shocked. Yes, my new friend, Silicone replied. Traumatic cataclysms have visited this planet since the beginning. But, the records that survive are wiped clean of their previous historical heritage and detail. What little remains in the human survivor's collective memory often appears much later as distorted tales or myths. Please describe what you know about the event that reduced us to such a sad state, Carbon requested. A sudden drastic pole shift event caused it? Pole shift, our friends repeated with amazement. Yes. Here is how it all happened, Silicone said. You see, Earth is a giant sphere, but its solid rocky outer crust is only about 500 miles thick. It floats freely on a molten lava mantle, which in turn covers an inner metallic core. The core is made of an outer liquid metal core and an inner solid metal core. The outer liquid metallic core turns freely around the inner solid metal core at Earth's very center. And just like the center point of a spinning spindle, it moves relatively slower than the solid metal center. The differing relative speed of the liquid metal outer core and the solid metal inner core creates Earth's tremendous electromagnetic fields. The movement differential between the solid and molten metal cores is Earth's own giant electromagnetic field generator. The phenomenon serves essential functions. For example, in the absence of an electromagnetic field, drag forces exerted by the sun's solar wind would blow Earth's gaseous atmosphere away. The Earth's magnetic shield deflects the electrically charged solar wind particles. Without it, the atmosphere would be blasted away into space, exposing all life forms to intense harmful solar radiation that would annihilate them instantly. Earth's electromagnetic field affects events like earthquakes, volcanoes, and atmospheric storms directly. Like most things, Earth is not flawless. Its core layers are not perfect spheres. The liquid metallic core is much denser than the molten lava mantle. But like tree roots, the liquid metallic core and the liquid mantle penetrate each other's zones. The Earth's crust is not uniformly thick everywhere. There are high mountains, deep oceans, and thick ice caps at the poles. Earth itself is not a perfect sphere. Due to centrifugal forces caused by its rotation around itself, it dips at the poles and bulges at the equatorial latitudes. Also, the Moon's gravity moves billions of tons of water from one place to another every day as oceanic tidal waves. Other neighboring cosmic bodies also exert gravitational forces on Earth. And so on. Then there is the flotation of Earth's crust over the outer liquid lava mantle. The crust's slow slippage over its liquid interior is called tectonic plate movement, from whose built-up friction energy earthquakes result. Earth's energy fields, in conjunction with its mineral mass configuration and movements, create and preserve the atmosphere and all other ecological settings that sustain life on Earth. It is a finely balanced life support system, an intricate nursery, provided and maintained by Mother Earth for all Earthlings. Now, if some unusually powerful outside cosmic force affects the fragile balance, then the whole thing can be thrown off balance. All earthly phenomena seem fairly well sudden external arrangement. External influence might include unusual temporary gravitational force from a large cosmic body like a comet, asteroid, or another planet. Are you guys following me so far? Sort of. Go on. During the pole shift carbon described to us, Earth's entire solid surface crust suddenly slipped on the interior liquid mantle. I do not know what caused that choreographed, yet introducing a force can change the fragile event 17,000 ago. Maybe we will find out later. It was one of the most destructive events in recorded history. At that time the North Pole was somewhere over Greenland, and the polar ice cap covered the North Sea, northwestern Europe, and northeastern America. The southern ice cap did not cover all of Antarctica, and its long peninsula was temperate and habitable. If any maritime culture lived there, the pole shift froze their continent into an uninhabitable wasteland. Before the pole shift, the equator crossed the southern tip of Africa, leaving North Africa a temperate savanna. Many ancient civilizations lived there. The deserts of North Africa, the Middle East, and Central Asia are quite young. Until about 17,000 years ago, their lush plains were home to many people. The Australian land mass was farther south, cooler, and not so arid. The biggest impact occurred, however, in Asia's northern Siberian plains. Before the pole shift, ice caps covered most of northwestern Europe and northeastern America and were much larger and thicker than the ice caps of our era. They accumulated over hundreds of millennia, and with so much water stored in ice, the world's ocean level was almost 450 feet lower. Who knows how many ancient ruins, how much of the world's history, the rising seas have submerged. With the northern Asian plains warmer and the ocean level lower, the shallow Bering Strait was dry land and at lower and more temperate latitude. Likely, people and animals moved freely between Asia and America. Population exchange between America and Asia took place far longer than some believe today. Before the cataclysm, fertile plains and forests, rivers, animals, and humans were common in northwestern Asia. The flat northern Siberian land mass and the lower ocean levels made for large, broad fertile plains. The milder supported a variety of flora and fauna. As Carbon said, there was plenty of food to support the hunter-gatherer human inhabitants. They were excellent horsemen and hunters, strong people whose horsemanship and knowledge of weapons were useful when their survivors fought their way south, southeast, and southwest. Immigrants, they overwhelmed or mixed with and adopted the cultures they found to the south. The mythical Aryans, who once lived west of the Ural Mountains, migrated south, west, and southwest. The ancestors of the Northeast Asians, who lived east of the Urals, migrated southeast. The inhabitants of the Americas were cut off from their Asian brethren forever, as the Northern Passage suddenly moved north, became cold and hostile, and over the millennia sank beneath the rising oceans. Some believe the pole shift moved the North Pole approximately 12 degrees, its present location in the Arctic Ocean. The South Pole shifted closer to the center of the Antarctic land mass. The two most affected areas were northern Siberia and Antarctica. A thick blanket of ice covered Antarctica and the remains of any civilization that may have existed there. Everything near the new polar zones that survived the initial catastrophe froze within hours. In our own time, the remains of mammoths, woolly rhinos, saber-toothed tigers, ancient deer species and trees and other vegetation turn up now and then under several meters of permafrost in northern Siberia and Alaska. The catastrophe caused winds, storms, lightning, earthquakes, and volcanoes, and after the tsunamis that rolled over the low-lying regions, crushing most life forms into heaps of mangled flesh and bones, tree debris, mud, rocks, and volcanic ash, the content of most Siberian and Alaskan permafrost. Modern geological evidence in the excavated soil strata from the period confirms the occurrence of such an event. Most developed human civilization disappeared instantly. Entire races, all their accomplishments and histories, vanished from the pages of history. The few remaining survivors were thrown into a state of primitive survival and forced to struggle against unimaginable hardships. The world's climate changed rapidly and unfamiliarly in most regions. Earthquakes, volcanic eruptions, rising oceans, and periodic flooding wrought continuous havoc. The world's human and animal populations fell drastically. After many years of such conditions, animal and human survivors faced transformed global conditions. Many species that could not migrate or adapt became extinct. The hungry human survivors hunted many of the remaining species, mammoths, woolly rhinos, saber-toothed tigers, to extinction. Their distant cousins survived because they were in less affected areas of the earth, like South Asia and Africa. The surviving humans of the freezing northern Asian plains migrated en masse, passing on what recollected knowledge they remembered to new generations. So began the mass migrations of the Aryans and the ancestors of modern East Asians from the northern Asian land mass. Although new ice began slowly forming over the new polar regions, the much quicker thawing of the old ice caps burned memories of rising oceans, floods, and lost cities and civilizations into the world's mythical and religious consciousness. The catastrophe still affects modern history. Silicone took a deep breath and considered the hour. I believe our time is nearing its end. According to my estimate, we've been here over 10 hours. Our friends looked around the dim cave. The humans huddled around their fires, clinging to hope. Outside, the storms and winds howled, and balls of black hail searched for victims, all lit by frequent lightning. The skinny canines dozed off restlessly, shaking or growling at every disturbance outside. Hydrogen pointed to a statue on a stone pedestal, a chubby female in a meticulously creased white dress with dried flowers and colored beads at her feet. The dress was an attractively complex outfit, unlike the cave dwellers' rags, evidence of the people's cultural consciousness. The woman smiled sweetly and held her chubby arms out in an embrace. "Who is she?" Hydrogen asked. "That is the Mother Earth goddess," Carbon answered. "A representation of fertility and sustenance, important to hunter-gatherer cultures that depend on nature for their survival," Silicone amplified. "I cannot tell you how grateful I am to meet you all tonight," Carbon said. "Why don't you come with us?" Hydrogen proposed, looking at the rest for confirmation. Silicone took the initiative. "We must leave in only a few minutes. Prepare yourselves. Embrace each other and Carbon, so he can return to our time with us." While holding and waiting, they gazed at the world of ice, fire, and floods they were about to leave forever, the Mother Earth shrine, the improvised blackboard, the sleeping survivors, the flickering flames, and the nervous skinny canines. Then they noticed the old chief in front of a drawing on a prominent corner of the cave wall. They could barely hear his murmur, "Praised be our heavenly Lord Azidahaka, for we need you not banish us so." The chief fell to his knees, and kissed the ground. The large drawing was of a strange humanoid, a tall hairless man, with large shining eyes, wearing a metallic cape and a symbol on his chest. He wore a large helmet from which protruded 7 serpents spitting lightning from their mouths. He looked serene, smiled calmly, and held an object in each hand. In one was what appeared to be a winged flaming heart. In the other was a staff shaped like a dragon/serpent, from whose eyes lightning radiated. "Is that thing the old man is bowing to a god?" Thunderous lightning shook the place, made the skinny dogs tremble, and drowned Oxygen's last words. Another flash of white light revealed our friends back in the transportal cave. An insect buzzing innocently about veered into the cave's mouth and disappeared at once. Empires of gold and steel. The ancients said that this man and his companions traveled north, working marvels as he went, and they never saw him again. He gave men instructions, how they should live, speaking of great love and kindness, admonishing them to be good and cause no harm or injury to others, but to love and show charity to all. He lifted huge stones by his word alone, he controlled fire, healed the sick by touch, spoke every tongue and knew of many miracles. They left as they came in the sea on a plume of foam. In most places he was called Virakaka. Inca myth. No longer can be seen the book of Popolva which the kings had in olden times. The original book, written long ago, existed, but now its site is hidden but to the searcher and to the thinker. Anonymous 16th century Inca chronicler. The first men measured the round face of the earth, examined the 4 points of the arch of the sky, succeeded in seeing, succeeded in knowing all that there is in the world. But the dark heart of heaven blew mist into their eyes. In this way all the wisdom and all the knowledge of the first men, their memory of their origin, and their beginning were destroyed. The Mayan Popolva. A shooting star zoomed across the star-filled Andean night sky. Hydrogen and oxygen looked at each other reminiscently. The group sat just outside the cave. They had much to discuss. "I wonder when we will find the Chamber of Destiny and the Universal Sign," Hydrogen mumbled impatiently. "First, we need to locate my old library," Silicon said, "and when it was destroyed. We cannot choose the transportal's time-space delivery point, so for now we can only go where it sends us." "How can we learn to make it send us where we want?" Carbon asked. "I am not sure if that's a question of learning or of wisdom," Silicon replied. "What do you mean?" "Knowledge and wisdom are quite different," Silicon said. "Knowledge comes from information, but wisdom comes from becoming worthy to attain it, and one becomes experiences." "What transportal?" "Because the nature of its power means people with undesirable objectives cannot use it. Think about it. People could influence historic events and change the future in many ways. That's a risky proposition in the hands of the unwise. As its location is hidden, so are its exact navigational powers. We will have to learn about it on our way. Until then, we must rely on the transportal's guidance." Dim light filtering through the catacombs of roots and branches about the cave's barely visible mouth announced the dawn. Our friends, ready for their next journey, gathered around the mouth of the transportal. Seconds later, they were in an enclosed room without windows and lit only by oil lamps mounted on the perfectly fitted, polished masonry walls. The stone blocks, cut at random angles, fit together like a jigsaw puzzle without mortar. Their stonemasons clearly knew advanced geometry and quarrying and polishing techniques. Calcium went to investigate. Regularly carved niches in the masonry walls housed statues and sculptures of finely crafted shining metal or glazed worthy by comprehending meaningful. Does all that have to do with the ceramic? Exquisite cushions lay atop beautifully patterned colorful rugs on one side of the room, the colors of the textiles full of life even in the dim light. The people who created the space knew craftsmanship and geometry, how to dye fabric, and most significantly had a sense of beauty. A man dressed in beautiful garments sat cross-legged on a cushion, seeming to stare at nothing, a sorrowful gaze. He was small but fit, his complexion golden brown and his jet black hair tied behind his head. On a small table before him were corn cakes and water. "Where are we?" Nitrogen asked. "I don't know yet," Silicone said. A metal lock clicked, and a heavy wooden door swung open. A tall, fair-skinned, bearded man walked in. He wore tight black pants, leather boots, slack white shirt, and a leather vest. A steel sword swung on one side, a flint-type pistol on the other. He stood silently before the sitting man. Another man, who resembled the sitting man, but more simply dressed, accompanied him. The tall man bowed, bent his left knee, and said, "Greetings. I regret having to meet you for the first time in such circumstances." The second man, different language for the moved nor spoke, just gazing into the distance as if to ignore them. "Who are they?" Carbon asked. "What language does the second man speak?" "This is Atahualpa, the great Inca, leader of the Empire of the Sun. They are speaking the imperial language, Quechua," a voice replied. Our friends turned toward the voice and saw a brilliantly shining earthling in a beautifully engraved ring on the sitting man's finger. "I am Gold," it said. "Who are you, and how did spoke translating into a sitting man, who neither you get here?" Silicone briefed Gold about their journey. "Would you translate for us?" "Yes, of course," Gold said. "I am just as curious about what is happening as you are. Who is this tall bearded man?" "He is Francisco Pizarro, the commanding general and the official envoy of the Spanish crown." The answer came from the sword at the man's waist. "I am Iron. Forgive my unsavory housing. I regret that it was not of my choosing. Please allow me to offer my assistance." "Yes," Silicone said, "the strong one. I know of you. I overheard your conversation, and your journey fascinates me. I also seek my true destiny away from this sword." Just then, Atahualpa addressed Pizarro, without turning his gaze. "Who are you, really? And what brings you to our sacred land?" "I am Commandante Francisco Pizarro of the court of their Majesties, the Holy Roman Emperor and Empress, monarchs of the Roman Catholic faithful, Ferdinand and Isabella, King and Queen of Spain and all her territories. I represent their Majesties. We are here to offer the heathen savages of this land the righteous truth and virtuous ways of Christianity, the Catholic Church, and His Holiness the Pope, Christ's vicar on earth." "You speak many big words," Atahualpa countered, "but you say nothing. You say you have come from another world across the great ocean, from the direction of the rising sun Lord, the blessed Spirit of the universe, and you mean to teach us your ways." "Yes. We bring your people the gospel of salvation." "Salvation? Today you massacred thousands of unarmed people who came to greet you in peace in Cajamarca. Even as they fled in fear and confusion, or tried to surrender. I regret that my men went too far. We meant to capture you alive, not to entourage." "Capture me? Why?" "Because you are civilized people. Even if we bring reinforcements, we are outnumbered. Our strategy was to take you hostage and force your people to surrender and cooperate. You call us savages, yet you say we are civilized. Who was that angry fat man who gave me that object today? What did he want?" "That was Hernando de Luque, a Christian friar. He tried to give you our Holy Bible. He meant to have you submit to it. When you insulted him by throwing the sacred Gospels on the ground, he called on my men to defend the faith and to rescue his fat flesh from you unpredictable infidels. That is why there was so much havoc. I regret I could not capture you with less bloodshed." "No one greeted us or spoke to us in our language," Atahualpa replied. "We came unarmed to talk peacefully. We brought the sacred disc to show our intentions. We meant to capture you, not talk. The friar interfered too early and spoiled my plans. The needless bloodshed could have been avoided. Now, what was that golden disc?" "The sacred disc you melted down and destroyed came from Coricancha, the holy temple of the sun, handed down from generation to generation by our ancestors. It represents sun's passage through the seasons and the houses of heaven. It is a calendar of time, yearly seasons, ages of the world, and more. Long slaughter your unarmed. A numerous, powerful, ago, our heavenly Lord Virakaka taught it to our ancestors. And we brought it to you as a test. Who is Virakaka? And what did you mean to test? Virakaka is mankind's patron and protector, the teacher of all knowledge, science, agriculture, the building arts, and civilization. He taught the secrets of the sacred disk to our ancestors. Legends say he came from the sea in a ship shaped like a winged dragon/serpent, riding on a sea of foam and fire. 12 disciples accompanied him. The legends say they were all tall men with shining skin. They wore flowing white capes and hoods of a strange shining metal. They came many thousands of years ago when our ancestors were few, the sole survivors of a great calamity. They lived in caves like animals, having forgotten their forefathers' civilization. Virakaka and his disciples traveled all along the coast and into the mountains, coaxing the survivors out of their caves. He recalled to them civilization, science, language, and the art of building. He gave them plant seeds and showed them how to raise crops on terraced highland slopes and to irrigate them from water reservoirs and canals. Most important, he taught them the word, laws, and how man and nature can live in peace. The sacred disk came from another of Virakaka's gifts, the study of the heavens. The temple priests teach their disciples such heavenly sciences. And why did you present it to us as a test? Pizarro asked again. After you landed on the coast, the priests, the nobles, and the commoners argued about who you really are. Many think you are the fulfillment of the prophecies, Virakaka's disciples returning to us. You are all tall, fair-skinned men, and you wear white capes and metallic helmets. And you carry Virakaka's sacred sign. What sign? The 2 crossed lines. The cross is one of the signs of Virakaka. You mean the crucifix, the Christian cross? Yes, it is one of our holy symbols as well. But what prophecies? Virakaka's good work ended in a fight with Siamak, the god of war on earth. He came after and fought Virakaka. Siamak forced Virakaka's followers to withdraw across the skies and the oceans, but ancient prophecies speak of Virakaka's return to restore peace and harmony on earth. Many believe the arrival of your ships from across the seas are the fulfillment of the ancient prophecies. Others do not. The Aztec king, Moctezuma, Silicon recalled, mistook the Spanish conquistador Cortés for the Aztec god hero Quetzalcoatl. His sign is a plumed serpent. At first they welcomed the Spanish and presented a jeweled feather cape and a golden serpentine mask, but the hospitality ended quickly when the Aztecs realized their mistake. Then they slaughtered most of the Spaniards, and few survivors escaped. Soon the Spanish returned and subjugated them. They brought with them European diseases that wiped out much of the native population. We were en route to Cuzco, our capital, Atahualpa resumed. We stopped to rest at the thermal springs just east of Cajamarca, when we heard of your landing. When you came quickly to Cajamarca, I knew you were seeking me. Ignoring the advice of cautious elders, I decided to greet you and test you with the sacred disk. Your response to it would reveal your identity and purpose. We had heard of the atrocities committed in the nations to the north. I decided to greet you personally, since you could be the gods returning. I came in peace, and peaceful greeting must be respected. But today you violated that basic honored rule. You confirmed the pessimist's worst fears. You are unenlightened men and certainly not disciples of Virakaka. We demand an apology. Release me at once and return to your own land. You are in no position to negotiate, Pizarro sneered. I cannot grant your request. Atahualpa sighed angrily. I feared so. You say your gods looked like us. You mean they were like men? Atahualpa pointed to 2 golden statues displayed in opposing niches. One was a man wearing a robe adorned with a symbol, and a large headdress, from which serpents protruded. He held a staff in each outstretched hand. That is Virakaka, Atahualpa said, and there is Pishicamak. The second statue was humanoid but with the head of a beast, fierce eyes, protruding fangs, a fearsome expression. A big 5 sign, from which a vulture's head protruded, adorned its chest. It held a long knife in one hand, and in the other a human skull by the hair. The Aztecs have a similar patron god, named Quetzalcoatl, and the war god, Tezcatlipoca. Cortez says the Aztecs are especially devoted to Tezcatlipoca. Human skulls and 5 symbols, Pishicamak statue, adorn their sacrificial altars. Were they men or gods? Yes, though they are far away, we have heard rumors of the Aztec savagery and human sacrifices to Pishicamak. Unlike us Incas, they have caused much misery among the people they subjugate. Virakaka and Pishicamak are neither men nor gods. They were deities, god-men. Sacrilege. There is but one God, the Christian God, creator of all that exists. Yes, the source of all creation. We believe in like those on this war banners and the Creator too. The Creator blesses us and sustains life through its worldly manifestation, the sun. That must be what you call your Christian God. The sun is not God. God created it and everything else. Yes, the Creator. We worship the same thing. Then why do you worship the sun and so-called God-men? I told you we worship the sun as the Creator's manifestation. Virakaka is a legendary god who shaped our history and culture. He left relics and buildings as his legacy. What buildings? Great stone structures that are our holy sites. Virakaka's men built them of stone, shaped and moved through the air by the power of their word. They taught our ancestors to build stone terraces to control the earth and water for farming. The towers of sacred Sacsayhuaman were designed to study the heavens. They drew the lines in the coastal desert of Nazca. Many sacred temples and ancient sites in Inca lands are dedicated to Virakaka. Just as there are ancient sites dedicated to Pishicamak, the war god, where you can see him portrayed with carvings of warriors and dead or dismembered enemies. Our subject nations are no longer certain of the mysterious origins of their ancient sites and legends. The heritage of the people of Nazca, Paracas, the Chimas, and the Chancas describe those ancient times. They say their dry coastal deserts were once lush and fertile, with many rivers and lakes fed by the ice atop the mountains. But then the waters stopped flowing a few thousand years ago. They say their food supplies and population numbers dwindled, weakening the coastal nations and leaving them subjects of the Inca Empire. We brought Virakaka's peaceful ways, the ways we inherited from our ancestors who lived in Tihuanaco near Lake Titicaca, where you can still see the ancient temple of Virakaka. The Inca nation united all those warlike people and turned them away from war, misery, and death, the ways of Pishicamak. We restored peace, and the ancient systems of farming, stonework, and water management. You call those pre-Inca? Pizarro said. How ancient? Older than anyone, engraved on sacred stone tablets and guarded in our temples. Say there have been 4 ages of civilization before ours. Calamities destroyed them all. The present age began after the floods and the departure of Virakaka. They say our age is about 12,000 years old and will end after many hardships and great changes on earth. Then Virakaka will return to save us, his children. What changes? I do not understand much of the prophecy. Our temple guardians protect the sacred tablets that reveal Virakaka's final instructions before he left. That information is not available to everyone. It is held and guarded in secret locations, awaiting the time when it will be revealed to the chosen ones. What time? When our age ends, the next will begin, the 6th age. Virakaka will return to help his children. The sacred texts contain the secret guidelines for that era. So your people think we are the fulfillment of that prophecy? They think one of us is your so-called god Virakaka? Pizarro asked. Some believed so. But rebel nations want to use you for political reasons, to betray us. I am trying to lead my people responsibly. Is that why you tried to welcome me instead of fighting? Knows. Nations. Ancient, records. Atahualpa gazed sadly into infinity. I told you that despite my doubts I respect my people's beliefs and traditions. I shall bear the pain of knowing that my people and nation will suffer from my mistake for many generations. I have some questions, Pizarro said flatly. I will be frank. Your civilization dazzles me. The architecture, the stone masonry, and the water systems are many times more advanced and complex than anything in Europe. Even the famous Andalusian Moors would marvel at the skills of your craftspeople. Only the Orient products rival your metal castings, your ceramics, and your textiles. You know agriculture, food storage, and medicine. But what is your question? 3 questions, really. First, why do you not have a writing system? Our expanded Inca Empire is only just over 100 years old. We have a system for record keeping, and experts who know how to use it. They serve the empire's administrative needs. Otherwise we transfer information orally. Our official messengers and record keepers have excellent memories. What is your next question? Why don't you use gold or silver to value the goods and services you trade? I do not understand the question, the Grand Inca replied. The land belongs to the Creator. As the gods taught us of the Creator's wishes, Inca society rests on equal benefits, justice, and welfare for all. The Inca administrators are caretakers of the land and the people, maintaining the empire and its security. We build and maintain roads, water reservoirs, and canals, public buildings, temples, and other sacred sites. Regional communities, we call them illas, care for the land parcels entrusted to them. They manage and farm the land. They provide food for their people and obtain other needs at designated exchange centers. If the illas neglect or harm the land, the Creator's gift, their leaders lose their privileges as punishment. The more they produce, the more they can obtain by exchange. We let no Inca subject starve, and our healers provide care without cost. How can gold and silver measure the Creator's love of the world and its people? That makes no sense to me. Why do you worship gold and silver? They are good for ornaments. They are easy to smelt, malleable enough to cast and work, and never corrode. Indeed they are beautiful, but the Creator blesses nature with them freely. Why should we equate something found freely in nature with the fruits of our labor and craft? You cannot eat gold if you are hungry or wear it if you are cold. The value of a golden object is represented by the amount of effort that transforms it useful. Your lust for gold and silver puzzles us. How can you take the precious sacred disk and melt it to a valueless block of gold? You are either crazy or stupid. If people's efforts and work products are exchanged for what the Creator provides freely, then gold can enslave craftspeople and farmers who have no access to gold. Then only those with gold control the rules of exchange, like the value of a bag of maize or an alpaca in gold. And that makes no sense. In any society, some must find and process gold or other natural minerals. Some must craft them into useful or beautiful objects, while others must farm to feed everyone else. Here the Incas exchange according to how much work and effort goes into producing each craft or crop, and not according to the dictates of those who have a lot of gold. Gold, like everything else in the world, is the Creator's gift, freely provided for all, not just the unscrupulous few. Our friends looked at Gold, who looked perplexed. Pizarro asked his third question. Why don't the Inca have steel swords? You have very advanced metallurgical skills. You use gold, silver, copper, even bronze alloys. But not steel. Why? The devilish hard metal you slice our flesh with is unknown to us. Our soldiers and craftspeople use polished obsidian, other hard stones, or brass to make weapons, arrowheads, chisels, and knives. We had never seen this metal. What is it? Where is it found? Steel comes from cooking iron with coal, Pizarro explained. Spain and other countries of my world know many places to find iron. It is much stronger than bronze. As you saw today, no sword or shield of yours resists the blow of a steel sword, and your obsidian or brass-tipped spears and arrows are useless against our steel-plated armor. What are those large, fast animals you ride? Horses. Our ancestors have domesticated them since ancient times. With your strong steel swords, shields, and armor, atop your fast powerful beasts, we haven't a chance against you fighting on foot. What are those thunderous fire weapons that flash and kill from a distance? You mean our guns and cannons. We learned about them from the Orientals. The Moors and the Turks taught us to use them. They learned about gunpowder from the Chinese and harnessed its explosive power within a metal chamber. The explosion causes a spewing metal ball far deadlier than an arrowhead or a stone from a slingshot. What evil magic spell do your people know that makes us sick and weak and has killed so many of us? Disease. We don't know how, but they move from the sick to the healthy and make them sick. How did you build such big boats? And how did you find your way here? Atahualpa asked. We learned to build corsairs and galleons from our contact with other seafaring people. They had learned from seafaring people before them, who gradually developed and perfected marine vessels for trade. As for how we found our way here, we use a compass to find a direction. A compass uses a magnet, a special type of iron needle that always points to the same north-south direction. A compass shows where one is going. If you know the wind's strength, you can determine the distance a ship travels in a day. We chart that on a map to see where we are. But if you had never been here before, why did you think of coming here? An Italian explorer, Christopher Columbus, discovered this continent about 25 years ago. His expedition set out to find a westerly route through the uncharted ocean to reach the riches of the Orient. But it was no accident that he found this new world. Everyone's ears perked up. Pizarro went organization. Christopher Vespucci, the explorer who identified the new lands as a continent, belonged to the society guards the secret body of knowledge held by an even older group called the Order of the Knights Templar, once very powerful and influential. But the Catholic Church persecuted them, and most of them went into hiding and carried on their secret activities with new identities and organizations. Among many other relics and secrets, the Templars' archives contained ancient charts and maps that came from the Orient. No one was certain whether they were real or false. They showed unknown lands to the west and south of Europe. They also presented the world as round, contrary to the common belief that the earth is flat. The maps showed the New World, and now on, belong to a secret Columbus and Amerigo. We have found it. For a long time the maps and charts puzzled us. When the Christians finally defeated the Moors of Andalusia, we found similar old charts and maps with the same information. The Moorish scholars believed their maps to originate from ancient Egypt, India, Mesopotamia, and China, lands you may not know about. My order was well aware of many such ancient mysteries, though we kept them hidden from the public and the Church. One of the Templars' responsibilities when they were formed during the Crusades was to find, preserve, and ensure the survival of ancient knowledge. Soon, when the time is right, we will reveal them and generate a renaissance of civilization. Our purpose was to rediscover the New World and prove the old maps authentic. Of course, the Crown, the Church, and my men and I are also here for this land's riches. So, Atahualpa added, your mission to bring us salvation is really about a secret agenda, as well as the chance to exploit my land and people. Pizarro did not answer. He could reveal no more. You say your people, government, and church, are really after my land's riches. What do we have here that you cannot find in your own land? Gold. Europe has no significant sources of gold and silver. Spain and most other nations use gold for all commerce and economic exchange. Your gold will make us all very rich. You are fooled by Pishicamak's evil influences. Atahualpa cried. He rules your minds and souls. You say our gold will make you rich. But, you fail to recognize that you will only enrich the people who produce the goods and services your gold will buy. You steal our gold. When you steal and exploit others, you abandon the ways of peace. You will grow lazy and forget how to produce life's necessities. You will depend on exploiting others. To provide for your people, you will give your stolen gold to other nations, those who actually produce your food, clothes, and everything else. They will learn new skills and knowledge to get rich off your evil deeds and greed, while you grow decadent and ignorant, true poverty. When our gold runs out, you will find yourselves poor, with no skills for producing food and other things you need. You will resort to further evil deeds, to enslave others to feed yourselves. Your world will become ruthless and warlike. Whether you are rich or poor, Pishikamak will enslave you and steal the freedom of your true self, the spirit the Creator gave you. True wealth comes only from living harmoniously with nature and the universe. Can't you grasp Virakaka's simple teaching? Pizarro's eyes glazed. Most of my men come from Andalusia. We are peasants. Your land and gold will make us noble. They persecuted us after the wars of the Inquisition. Your riches will buy us respect, status, and power. Indeed, all lands are rich, but they remain rich only if their people live harmoniously with it. My people work with the land for everyone's benefit, not for your exploits. From now on, they work for us. And if we refuse? Pizarro did not answer. So your salvation is in fact slavery. That is what the Christian armies did to the Muslims and Jews of Andalusia when they liberated it. We are the Christian servants of our Christian conquerors. Now you become our servants. Who are Muslims and Jews? Did they not believe in the Creator so that you had to make them Christians? Oh, they had religions of their own, but in our land we permit only the religion of the Catholic Church. After we beat them, we forced the Muslims and Jews to convert or leave Spain. The Inquisition tortured or killed many. So what you call your faith in the Creator, Atahualpa responded angrily, does not tolerate other faiths that believe in the Creator. People must follow your religion or die. You are followers and servants of Pishikamak. He has stolen your souls and blinded you with ignorance, hate, violence, and greed. Our worst fears have come true. I have subjected my people to slavery. You carry the insignia of Virakaka, but in truth you follow Pishikamak. You damned evil fools. Atahualpa rose to his feet abruptly and paced back and forth. Pizarro sat in silence until Atahualpa turned to him and said, "The ransom you demand, enough gold and silver to fill this room, will not secure the release of my people and your promised departure, will it?" "No," Pizarro said flatly, "it won't. We will bring reinforcements, build strongholds, make alliances with rebellious tribes, and tighten our grip on your land and people." I suspected that. My people believe their gold and silver ornaments and statues will get you to leave, as you falsely pledged. They think you are holding me hostage but that you will release me and leave with the loot. They trust you. They are complying because that is the safest way. How happy our enemies must be. They believe our promises of freedom and independence from Inca rule. They resented the civil war between you and your half-brother Huáscar, whom you killed. Many have betrayed you and allied themselves with us. They think we will give them independence if they help us defeat the Inca hordes. Fools! Then you do not mean to honor any of your promises, much less fulfill their hopes. Pizarro smiled slyly. Such are the ways of the world. No. Such are the ways of the world as you make it. Virakaka taught us to strive for something far better. We must be different. Pizarro sighed. Not in our lifetime. For so long as the flesh leads the soul, we shall languish in the domain of darkness. You cannot let me live, Atahualpa said. You must destroy the pride and memory of our race and our ways. I appeal to the honor of this night of frankness. Can you at least tell our future generations of my honor and dedication to them? Disculpe, Señor, that is out of my hands. The Church will decide that. You will soon die, and the symbol of the Inca Empire will disappear. History will say you gave away your nation's gold and its freedom to save your own head. My people will portray you as a selfish, cowardly savage. We will deprive your future generations of their proud history. It will make conquering your land easier. You are wrong. Atahualpa rejoined. The guardians of the temples and the sacred sites will never let our legacy die. They will preserve our ways and the wise teachings of Viracocha. They will save the secrets of our sacred sites from your evil grasp. You may take our gold and our land and enslave our people, but our legacy is ancient and runs far too deep. Some, maybe much of it, will surely survive for our children and their children. We have a duty to preserve the sacred instructions to be ready for Viracocha's return and the coming of the sixth age. Your kind, evil disciples of Siamak, will never find them. A day will come when the world rediscovers the truth behind our magical civilization. The world will flock to our sacred sites and temples. They will stand in awe of our ancient monuments and relics, and the wisdom of our beliefs. They will yearn to follow the ways of peace and universal harmony. They will see the lost and stolen legacy of humanity as Viracocha wished it. In such future age, a few enlightened souls will reveal the sacred texts and instructions. Then they will prepare for the sixth age and the return of Viracocha. Time and history will bear witness. Pizarro did not answer. Atahualpa looked at Pizarro sadly. The reality of this world and the created universe is far beyond our imagination and under no one's control. A sense of doom hung in the air. Silicone spoke hesitantly. We have only a few minutes before we return to our time. I am ashamed of my involvement with these sad events, Iron murmured. I wonder if these people can preserve any of their legacy, as Atahualpa hopes, Gold mused. I investigated the masonry walls, Calcium said. I learned of caves and sites in the Andes with strange writings and symbols engraved in stone. Apparently, they come from an ancient era when the gods were here. Supposedly, some temples have hidden chambers that hold maps and coded information about such sites. Only a small group of trusted priests and guardians know of them. If Pizarro is right, Carbon said, the dark forces at work here will soon destroy those relics of ancient wisdom. That is if they can find them, Calcium interjected. According to what I was told, very few dedicated temple guardians have that information. Each one knows about only a small number of sites. Together they know about them all. They all belong to a secret brotherhood administered from Coricancha, the Temple of the Sun, in Cuzco. The ancient god's instructions must be preserved for the benefit of humanity, Hydrogen declared with its usual heroic enthusiasm. You all heard it? Their teachings deal with the source. My friends, Gold said, I want to tell you something. Everyone focused on the newcomer. These people associate my kind with their god Viracocha and his wise teachings. That is why they fashion statues and icons of their gods from gold. The Coricancha Temple of the Sun, which was built on the remains of even more ancient temples, is dedicated to preserving and promoting their gods' teachings. Its roof and the walls are covered in gold. The temple gardens display replicas of flowers, plants, trees, and animals, made entirely of gold. The entire complex is designed to be in harmony with the sun. Our nature is to shine. When the sunlight falls on us, we reflect the sun. That is why the Coricancha temple is so adorned with gold. The entire temple shines like the sun's terrestrial emissary. Its intense brilliance is visible from the mountains around Cuzco. Interesting, implying. If as we conquistadors are after the gold here, they will soon strip the temple's gold veneer and ornamentation. That will disrupt the sun's shining reflection from the golden Coricancha, which the people watch every day from far away. They may see an omen, a message from the gods, or they may see the invaders' true intentions. They will know that the Spanish invaders who defile the holy places of Viracocha cannot possibly be associated with Silicone said. What are you? Have learned, the Spanish hymn. True, Silicone agreed. That means they will hurry to safeguard their sacred tablets and secret sites before the Spanish find them. The temple guardians may be able to save some of the relics entrusted to them. We still do not know the identity of Viracocha, but we can assume that his heritage needs to be protected. At that moment, Pizarro forcefully took the royal seal ring on Atahualpa's index finger. Perhaps, Pizarro worried that instructions might be sent from the prison. Certainly, the gold in the ring was insignificant compared to what was soon to arrive as ransom. Pizarro left the room, followed by his Quechua interpreter. The sound of the locking heavy deadbolt reminded everyone who was now in charge of the Empire of the Sun. "May Gold and I join you?" Iron asked. "If I may speak for both of us, tonight's events have changed and inspired us forever." Gold, who along with Iron had decided to remain with our friends within Atahualpa's windowless stone prison, nodded in agreement. Through the small ceiling vent perforation, the brightening dawn sky was now becoming visible. But, the room seemed much darker now. Was it the shadow of the dark forces that would now control this blessed land of the sun, or just the dimming lamps that were running out of oil? Atahualpa, the great Inca, sat helplessly. As tears flowed down his bronze-colored cheeks, he gazed sadly at the golden statue of Viracocha. The revered god appeared to be dying in the fading light of the oil lamps. Just then, an oil lamp, next to the golden god, briefly flickered with a very completely burning out. Luminosity restored Viracocha's full brilliant shine. The serene-looking god, with his serpent-protruding helmet, still held out his reassuringly caring arms. Perhaps, an intense brightness before. The increased temporary reminder of the magnanimous god's promised return to save his people, it inspired Atahualpa to faintly smile and close his tearful eyes. A powerful flash of light followed the flicker of the dying oil lamp, delivering our friends back to their world. Crossroads of myths and mysteries. O living Aten, the beginning of all life, though distant, your rays are upon the earth, you are seen everywhere, yet your ways are unknown, how everything you created manifests, though you are hidden, you who created and sustain everything, and all people on all lands. You are alone, rising in your distant heaven, your breath sustains all that you have created. O sole God, like whom there is no other, you yourself are life, and all live through you. Excerpts from Akhenaten's Hymn to Aten. I am Yhvy, Yahweh, thy Elohim. Thou shalt have no other gods before me, for I, the Lord, thy God, am a jealous God. Exodus 20, 2-4. I don't understand. Hydrogen and the rest were sitting outside the cave. Only distant stars pinpricked the evening darkness. When no one answered, Hydrogen continued. What drives humans to such irrational insensitivity toward one another? Their bodies consist of all of our kinds. What is it that blinds but does not bind them? They are complex networks of organic molecules, millions of us, and their size gives them complex unitary abilities. Whereas we seek each other's cooperation, humans can do a lot on their own. Maybe their complexity makes the journey to the source easier, but their awareness of their powers, they call it ego, blinds them. Like confused children abusing their powers, they often harm themselves or others. That's what I meant by worthiness. Power in the hands of the unwise becomes a destructive dark force. A purple dawn rose above the mountainous horizon, signaling their next journey. The group eagerly awaited the rising sun and the transportal's accompanying flash of light. Moments later, they were scanning their new surroundings. The grand hall's magnificent flower-shaped stone columns flanked the high walls and carried a plastered ceiling covered with carved motif designs, all painted in brilliant colors. Polished alabaster slabs of dazzling geometrical arrangement, and the walls painted with Egyptian hieroglyphics. Large statues resembling godly superhumans dominated the hall, their perfect facial features, hairless heads and faces, large almond-shaped eyes and blue-hued skin otherworldly and surreal. They wore magnificent clothes, jewelry, and unusually large crowns. Some were in long flowing robes and held oddly shaped scepters, and others had wing-shaped capes. Gold pointed at one with a golden crown, adorned with the familiar symbols of a sun disk and a protruding cobra, a sign prominently displayed on its chest. He looks like Viracaka's Egyptian twin, Helium commented. Or Azidahaka. These must be their gods, Carbon concluded. Dim light entered through small openings in the wall. At the end of the hall, long white linen drapes fell from a balcony, fluttering in the gentle late afternoon breeze. The friends moved toward the balcony from where they heard voices faintly. The terrace, colonnaded and floored in alabaster, looked onto a semi-arid plain, extending toward reddish mountains on the horizon. 4 tall, muscular, tanned men stood guard, equidistant and perfectly still. They wore ceremonial military uniforms, embroidered white shirts and tunics. Brass the floor consisted of different hues laid in a studded leather vests and sandals and held long brass spears. A brass head ring secured their red and white striped fan-shaped cloth headdress. Forward on the balcony were 2 throne-like chairs of exotic wood, brass fittings, and elegant upholstery. 2 graceful men of evident importance sat quietly, gazing at the distant landscape. The older one was tall and slender. He wore a white, blue, and gold head-dress, and robes that hung to the ankles of his sandaled feet. The loose garb did not hide his ample hips. He had an abnormally elongated head and face, chiseled nose and chin, and full lips. Appearing to be in his 40s, he did not look quite normal. The younger was in his early 20s, handsome, with big dark eyes and average build. His jet-black straight hair hung down to his shoulders. He wore a white and red blouse and tunic, and an intricately worked silver-studded leather vest. Upon a carved mahogany table were silver bowls of fruit and lacquered ceramic jars of liquid refreshment. Both men stared serenely at the blood-red sun, gradually falling below the western horizon like a wounded and dying god. The music of songbirds accompanied the soft rustling of the wind-blown linen drapes. "This place is a lot more pleasant than the last 2, Helium stated. "Where are we? Who are these people?" Oxygen asked. "I believe we're in Egypt." Silicone replied. "I don't get it," Helium said. "How do you know about so many things if you sat in the desert for thousands of years? Since the Great Library was destroyed, I met and learned from others of my kind, who knew many things. That is how I have learned that I do not know enough." "Indeed, you are in Egypt." The voice came from within a polished bronze staff lying next to the old man, shaped like a winding cobra topped by a golden sun disk. "This man is Akhenaten, the visionary pharaoh of the 18th dynasty. He is the exiled leader of the Habaru in Lower Egypt." "I am copper." Another voice continued from inside the cane. "And I am tin. Together we make bronze." "Who are you?" The group introduced themselves. "Who are these Habaru?" Carbon asked. "They migrated to work in Egypt from the territories to the northeast," Copper explained. "Who is that young man?" Silicone asked. "He is the young pharaoh Tutankhamun, the son of Akhenaten from his concubine Kia. Akhenaten had 6 daughters from Nefertiti, the queen, but no male heir. His son from Kia, and successor, Tutankhamun later changed his name from Tutankhaten and married his half-sister to become the next legitimate 18th dynasty pharaoh." "Why did he change his name?" A shining white entity replied from within an earring on the young pharaoh's ear. "I am silver. Let me explain. Following Akhenaten's abdication, Queen Nefertiti ruled as Semenkhara until the child Tutankhaten came of age. Once enthroned, he exchanged the Aten in his name with Amon as a gesture of reconciliation with the old dominant religion of Upper Egypt. He restored the worship of the old gods and reopened their temples." "That's right," Silicone said. "The heretic pharaoh Amenhotep IV, the name means Amon is content, later changed his name to Akhenaten, means glory of Aten. He tried to replace Egypt's ancient gods with a monotheistic spiritual philosophy. He ruled from 3357 to 3349 BCE during the 18th dynastic period, one of Egypt's most remarkable eras. His transformations shook the foundation's society, religion, culture, as well as the balance of power between the throne and the Amon priesthood. 5 years later, the Amon priesthood and certain ambitious military leaders exiled him. Akhenaten's story was subsequently erased from Egyptian history, his legacy largely lost, forgotten, or misunderstood. Yet in many ways his saga continues to influence history. At that moment Akhenaten spoke in a soothing yet royal voice. "I am glad to have you here, my son. It has been many years since we spent time together. You have become a fine pharaoh. Tell me, how are Queen Mother Nefertiti, your wife, and my other daughters? How is your mother?" "They are well. They send their blessings. They are sad you cannot be with them." "Have things changed in Upper Egypt? Your capital city, Akhenaten, Amarna, is deserted and ransacked. Its gardens, palaces, and squares lie in ruin, its magnificent buildings stripped, their stone masonry carried off for use elsewhere. The Amon priests regain their stature, power, and wealth. They persecute your followers and reassert the ancient gods. The Amon priesthood means to eradicate the remnants of Aten. Mutiny brews in the army. In an unholy partnership with the religious establishment, generals Ramses and Seti plot against us. They say the 18th dynasty were corrupt, treacherous Habaru half-breeds. They plan to rid Egypt of Asiatic infidels and restore Egypt's racial and religious purity. I'm afraid our days may be numbered." How do people respond to all that? They still suffer from the last dozen years' droughts and plagues. If you recall, 7 of the most unorthodox of Egyptian severe years occurred during your reign. The priests still fill their pockets, but their temple rebuilding projects drain the treasury. People suffer, and I am virtually powerless. They blame my government and make scapegoats of the surviving Habaru. They say we angered Amon and brought on the droughts and plagues. They accuse us of spending the nation's riches to protect you and your followers up here. Your self-exile only emboldens them. The people believe that as long as the infidel foreigners have influence in Egypt, the people's lives will not improve, and the glories of Egypt will not return. The ancient mystery traditions are also under scrutiny. The Amon priests do not want to risk a repeat of past experience. They oppose the old traditions, especially the cults of Osiris, Thoth, and Isis. The guardians of the Temple of Osiris had to hide their libraries. They worry about losing their sacred papyrus scrolls. The sacred sciences have been brought under administrative control. You know, Father, since you have been away, I have learned much about the ancient ways of wisdom. Akhenaten gazed at the orange-colored sky reflected by the belly of a small cumulus cloud. His beloved sun, the manifestation of Aten, was gone, but the cloud's reflection confirmed its existence. Aten, like its emissary the sun, would always be there, could never be denied, even if out of sight. "My son," Akhenaten said at length, "did I ever tell you about my childhood in Lower Egypt?" Tutankhamun turned his big black eyes to his father. "So did our friends. First, let me remind you that the empire once extended along the Mediterranean coast into Canaan and Mitanni. Egyptian power was unchallenged, and Mesopotamia was weak and divided. Before the 17th dynasty of Amosi and his son Amenhotep I, the Hyksos conquered all our Asian territories. They even overran the north of Egypt. While they controlled Lower Egypt, our forefathers could not sail along the Nile to the sea. Ancient, glorious Egypt seemed headed for the same destiny as Sumer. But Ahmose and Amenhotep drove the Hyksos out and regained Lower Egypt, though not our Asian territories. Then our great-grandfather Thutmose III, who founded the 18th dynasty, finally took the throne from Hatshepsut, the first female pharaoh. The old guard opposed him at first, for he was the son of the last 17th dynasty pharaoh, Thutmose II, by a minor wife of Asiatic origin named Sarah. She was from the family of Abraham, chief of a prominent Habaru clan. As far as the establishment was concerned, Thutmose III was not of pure Egyptian blood, but half Habaru. Eventually, that half-breed prince, our ancestor, became the first pharaoh of the 18th dynasty. He drove deep into Asia, defeated the Canaanite-Mitanni alliance decisively at the Battle of the Valley of Armageddon, and regained Egypt's lost Asian territories up to the western bank of the Euphrates. He captured Kadesh, Megiddo, the stronghold of Zion, and the land of Jerusalem. In honor of his victories, he replaced the destroyed Egyptian temples and built a temple for the Habaru, who went back to their own lands. That is why he is called King of the Habaru, the builder of the famous Temple of Jerusalem. Is that why people call the 18th dynasty pharaohs half-breed Habaru? Exactly, my son. The dynasty pharaohs Thutmose Amenhotep III, and I have always had close affinities with our Asian brethren, the Habaru. Think about it. Escaping famine and Hyksos succeeding 18th 4, your grandfather rule, many Canaanites had fled and settled in northern Egypt. For most of these people, called the Habaru, Egypt has been home for generations. Both the Hyksos and the Egyptians oppressed them. Thutmose III's marriage to Sarah bound their people into the fabric of Egyptian society. That is why the Habaru recognize him as their first true king. The marriage also secured their allegiance to Egypt and their role in governing and defending Egypt's Asian provinces. For many of the Habaru, Thutmose III was a hero king, who restored their national pride and identity. These people are industrious, resourceful, and have their own spiritual traditions. The 18th Egyptian dynasty is one of Egypt's most glorious eras, due to the intermixing of peoples and their cultures. The Amon priesthood and their political allies either forget or ignore that fact. Yes, my son, humanity is generally disconnected from reality, and the usual consequences are conflict and suffering. And Lower Egypt's gods. The first three 18th dynasty pharaohs ruled over a newly reunited Egypt, and the mystery traditions of Thoth, Isis, Osiris, Horus, and Ra, as well as the Habaru gods, Akhenaten said. 4 centuries before the reunification, the priests of Amon reigned supreme in southern Egypt. The religious quagmire of the newly reunited Egypt challenged the early 18th dynasty administrations. What was the solution? As a ceremonious compromise, Amon, the historical god of Upper Egypt, was merged with Ra to create the supreme Amon-Re, the king of the gods. While the other ancient Egyptian and Habaru gods were nominally tolerated. This transformation took place during Thutmose III's rule. The inadequate resolution, however, caused the various temples to compete for recognition and donations. The confusion persisted until Father's royal decrees established hierarchical equivalence between the Amon temples and the others. Father's decrees effectively reduced the Karnak Amon priests' religious influence, power, and wealth, but strengthened the royal house. They never forgave us for that. That was the blow that started their enmity, which eventually led to today's events. What of your childhood experiences? Oh yes. Awakenings, my beloved son, awakenings. My eyes were opened for the first time. Akhenaten silently gazed at the now darkened night sky. The crescent moon's beams whirled serpent-like through the waves of rising desert warm air. Tutankhamun interrupted his father, you spent most of your childhood in Zaru, in Lower Egypt. Tell me about the origins and meanings of the ancient Egyptian traditions. Good, my son, very good. Open your mind to the unspoken words. Secret teachings reveal much wisdom. The truth lies beneath the surface reflections. Contemplation penetrates the surface to reveal the truth that lies beyond. Akhenaten paused, breathed deeply, and then went on. You have seen the five great pyramids, the 3 at Giza, the red and the bent pyramids, and the Sphinx and its temple complex. Of course. Why? Have you really seen them? Have you stood before their grandeur and majesty and really admired them? The mystery traditions teach that the ancient gods embedded many secrets in them. At that point a uniformed man came upon the balcony, approached the 2 nobles, and talked quietly. The pyramids, Silicone explained in the meantime, are among the most enigmatic structures that have survived from antiquity. Science continues to unearth their previously undiscovered features. Ordinarily, people believe slaves built each one, using bronze chisels, ropes, and rollers. Having quarried millions of tons of stones hundreds of miles away, they assembled them all during one megalomaniac pharaoh's life to give him a private tomb. That theory hardly explains some of their complexities. Throughout and under them run corridors and chambers with puzzling engineering and mathematical features. Oddly, none bears any Egyptian building record or any sign or text proclaiming their builders, whereas typically other ancient monuments provide that information. In later better recorded times, dozens of smaller pyramids were built from stone rubbles and lie in ruins, and each is covered in designs and texts attributed to its builder. All have been looted of their mummies and treasures, but not the Great Five Pyramids. Apparently, no one entered them between their building and the era of a studious Memluk sultan, who once inside, found no mummies, no treasure, no information, nothing. Those magnificent structures remain a mystery. Maybe their builders forgot to sign their names before sealing the secret doors, Helium humored. The uniformed man finished his conversation, bowed, and walked away. Akhenaten resumed. We revere the sacred pyramids and imitate them so we may reach the ancient gods' heavenly abodes. The priests pretend to understand their messages, but they are deceitful fools. I believe the ancients left a message for humanity. Maybe those structures guard secrets, but we still cannot understand them. Perhaps, Tutankhamun said, their message is meant only for those worthy of its power. As you always told me, a blade can cut the harvest or someone's flesh. It depends on who wields it. Akhenaten nodded. Are there other sites buried deep in the desert sand? Often I feel the desert did not always cover Egypt, for she houses numerous remnants of ancient civilizations. Have you visited the ziggurat in Saqqara built by the pharaoh Zosur? On its inner walls, his priests inscribed the pyramid texts, the first written version of what we revere as the Holy Book of the Dead. Father, every educated person makes that pilgrimage. Again I ask, have you really seen it? Please explain. The Saqqara step pyramid is built within a far more ancient site. The surrounding walls, decorated at the top with sacred cobra heads, are built with the same workmanship and precision as the Great Five Pyramids. Since unknown ancient times, the complex has been attributed to the god Osiris. A group of initiated priests preserved the wisdom of the ancient gods' alchemy, magic, astronomy, and other sacred arts. Long ago the priests began to misinterpret or disagree about the ancient message. They decided to break the sacred oral tradition and inscribed the texts on the walls of a small step pyramid built for that purpose inside the temple complex in an archaic form of our language we no longer understand. Later they translated it into contemporary hieroglyphics. The ancient pyramid texts described the scriptures we revere today as the Holy Book of the Dead. I wonder if their ancient wisdom will survive? I fear their true message is already lost. Most people are illiterate. They use the holy texts to decorate houses and tombs. Egypt relies on false, corrupt priests who claim to be the messengers, interpreters, and guardians of the holy texts. They sedate the illiterate masses into submission with false hopes, sermons, and fear. They satisfy the lazy masses' spiritual thirst, as well as the ruling establishment's needs. We make little statues of mythical gods as ornaments portable, convenient, pretty. Jewelry, decoration, toys. No one even acknowledges or understands the wisdom of the sacred texts. Nowadays you can lead an evil life, then buy a holy blessing, write a few passages from the scriptures on your coffin, and hope to go to the heavens to dwell with the gods. People do not see even the reflection on the surface, let alone what lies beyond. Tutankhamun nodded sadly. Father, tell me about the resurrection after death mentioned in the Book of the Dead. Look, son. The night is dark. The sun, the Aten's sacred manifestation, seems to have disappeared, but you can still see its reflection from the moon. My beloved son, realization requires imagination, thought, conscious effort, and discipline. Unguided, humanity tends to laziness, leisure, and selfishness. Effort and discipline are not our virtues. For thousands of years, we have recited the sacred texts without understanding their true message. What the scriptures call Ka or spirit, every living being's essence, is the sun in all of us. The priesthood promotes the belief that only faithfulness assures us of a heavenly abode after death. But blind faithfulness, or the money paid for mummification, trinkets, or blessings, doesn't lead to a lofty afterlife. The priesthood establishment has a monopoly and a high price for mummification and blessings. So apparently, only the rich have any chance of attaining immortality. That is not the ancients' message. I believe the sacred message reveals that the breath of Aten, Ka, the sun in all of us gives us life in this world and in the next. Everyone has a Ka that survives death. Like Aten, the Ka is beyond physical worldly existence. That is the essence of the Ka. The Ka is immortal by nature, because it is part of Aten. That is what I believe and what I preach. Akhenaten pointed at the statue of the god, wearing the cobra and sun disk crown, and the sun on its chest. I believe that is the ancient god's true message for humanity. The Amon priesthood always opposed my interpretations, unlike the poor, the oppressed, intellectuals, and artisans. During the Hyksos occupation, the ancient traditions of Osiris, Ta, Aten, Thoth, and Isis went underground. After Lower Egypt was freed, the Amon priesthood tried to keep the competition suppressed. I wanted to break the Amon priesthood's yoke. I had no quarrel with the ancient gods and the wisdom they bestowed upon humanity. Rather, I could not promote superstitious obedience to vague idols, whether dozens, or just one. We should not worship the ancient gods. We should be enlightened by their sacred message that has to be deciphered and transmitted to everyone. Someone has to lift humanity out of the quicksand of spiritual ignorance. Only decent, compassionate, spiritual ways lead us to realize our already present immortality. Do you understand? We must really understand the scriptures, not just donate to a temple or hang a little statue or some misunderstood words on an amulet. Spiritual salvation is not a choice or a luxury but a right and an undeniable duty for all. Seems like he is talking about finding the source, Hydrogen whispered. Sure, makes a lot of sense, Helium concurred. You know the rest of the story, Akhenaten said. The opportunists in the military are allied with the Amon priesthood. Despite the loyalty of Horemheb and I was threatened with revolt and bloodshed unless I abdicated. I left Akhenaten with my followers, though not everyone who needed protection. How are they treating the rest? Not well, father. They are excluded from the religious, social, and economic domains. For now, I, mother, Horemheb, and I protect them. Otherwise, there would be mass chaos and bloodshed. Our legacy is under threat. There are many rumors, father, but I am not afraid. After I went into exile, they reopened the Amon temples, but the Amon priesthood will not rest until they regain their monopoly. You must be careful. Tutankhamun nodded but changed the subject. Father, following your advice, I studied the mystery traditions. I have learned much, but much puzzles me. Some concepts are mysterious even to the scholars. They say that much knowledge has been lost since the gods left Earth, and other knowledge must remain hidden. I have come across perplexing relics. The mystery traditions guard ancient secret manuscripts, written in undecipherable passages that sound like mathematical symbols. Meaningless poetry but somehow raise you to another spiritual state. And then there's alchemy and all that about the philosopher's stone, some existential state invisible to others. I have heard the rumors, my son. But since the alchemists hide their knowledge, we should not even converse such things with ignorant people. They were meant to enlighten us, not to be abused for commerce or spiritual sedation. The mystery schools have begun to hide their wisdom, Tutankhamun observed, in anticipation of an onslaught from the Amon priesthood. Many have sought safety in mountain sanctuaries where they intend to ride out the purge of all heretical faiths. We can only lose what we do not deserve to keep. Father, tell me about the faith of the Habaru. They used to live in Canaan and the Sinai provinces, didn't they? The Canaanite traditions influenced their belief. Their gods El, Baal, Mot, Anat, and others resemble the Akkadian and Sumerian gods, just as the Sumerian gods Enki, Enlil, and Ishtar resemble our Osiris, Ra, and Isis. The gods of Sumer and Egypt are almost identical. Upon arriving here in exile from Egypt proper, we have had to work hard to promote our faith in the true Creator, Aten. Our first year mostly dealt with the social and economic integration with the local population. That was quite difficult. The Egyptian immigrants were more skilled in farming. However, the land here is drier, and there are no major rivers like the Nile. Water is only available from underground sources. The terrain consists of basically a parched rocky land, suitable mostly for reluctance to share hardship, conflict, and violence. Derived from Egyptian legal codes, a simple set of laws was enshrined as a sort of code of ethics. I, the heretic pharaoh, have been reduced to a tribal leader of an unruly populace. These conditions have only benefited the usual opportunists. The traditional alliance between the local Amorite nobility and the northern kingdoms of Canaan has fostered the current rebellion. Akhenaten paused and looked at his son. That is why I called on you. I am no longer considered Egypt's favorite citizen. But, it is in our collective interests to defend the integrity of Egypt, and all its minorities including the Habaru, against the onslaught of the Canaanite and their Hittite allies. If we lose these lands, the local Egyptians and Habaru will be exiled again, or reduced to foreign servitude. And, with the Canaanites and Hittite navy at the doorsteps of the Nile's trading routes, it will not be long before the accomplishments of the 17th and 18th dynasties will be undone. Tutankhamun fell silent and gazed across the herding. The natives initial their herding territory caused moonlit plain. He enjoyed talking to his wise father. It felt like the most beautiful evening he had ever experienced. Serenity spread before them. But, he was suddenly shaken by a vision of screaming bloody bodies, which would soon stain this majestic manifestation of Aten. Where was Aten? Where were the gods? He remembered his mentors at the temple of Osiris in Memphis. He recalled the Osiris temple monks' vows of tolerance and nonviolence in the face of oppression and hardship. It is hard to be a holy man when one is cast outside a temple, when one is a leader of the people. Could the immense wisdom of the sacred ancient scriptures be summarized in just a few commandments? Father, he said at last, there are rumors of an attempt on my life. Should something happen to me, promise you will not put yourself or the family in danger by opposing the rebels. That could trigger a massacre. That will happen regardless of what I do. I do not hope to regain Egypt's heart and soul. I have already failed. But in case of an exodus, our people will need help. If they depose you, I and Horemheb cannot get the refugees out safely. It is my moral and spiritual duty to help them escape. Tutankhamun pointed to the desert dawn sky's myriad stars. Father, which star is closer to heaven, to the abode of Aten? Any of them. Why do people refer to you as Mos? Just as Tuthmos, Thothmos, means reflection of Thoth, Ramses, Ra-Mos, means reflection of Ra. According to them, I am the reflection of the invisible God. Why do they call me a Yeshua? Because they consider you a savior. That's what it means in their language. You are here to help them gain their promised land. The land they believe Aten and I promised them, a place of peace and prosperity. Surely, following the ways of Aten can lead to such a world. They smiled and gazed at the sky, red with the sun's rise, red in anticipation of a bloody battle. Tutankhamun got up, knelt, embraced his father's hand and kissed it. Father, I must prepare for battle. Tutankhamun walked away, passing through the still fluttering white linen drapes and disappeared from view. Akhenaten lovingly followed every last move of his departing son. He then quietly whispered, "Here we are, ironically living the dark ways of war, chaos, and conflict." Akhenaten then rose, turned to a statue and cried, "Damn you, Seth! Again you steal our faith and fate. How long must humanity put up with your evil designs? When will you free us from war, misery, subjugation, and slavery?" The statue represented a tall man with the head of a black jackal and tall square ears, fierce red eyes, and a cold smile. Its headdress featured a fearsome vulture. Red straps crossed like a big five lay over its white tunic. Hydrogen and oxygen saw a tear roll down Akhenaten's elongated chin. His prominent hips leaning on his bronze serpent cane, he limped beyond the white curtains at the balcony entrance. Copper, tin, and silver rushed forward, and silver said, "What will happen to Tutankhamun?" "I'll tell you what I know," silicone said. Tutankhamun survived the next few days. The Egyptian army re-established Egypt's sovereignty over the Promised Land, a semi-autonomous Egyptian province and a haven for the exiled Habaru. The arrangement did not 18th dynasties last beyond the reign of the last pharaohs Tutankhamun, Horemheb, and I. Soon Ramses fulfilled his ambition of becoming pharaoh, supported by the Amon priesthood. His reign marked another era of Egyptian military glory. Her Asian borders again extended well into Asia, all the way to the western bank of the Euphrates. The period also marked the re-establishment of the Amon priesthood's intolerant religious monopoly and the persecution of religious and racial minorities. One of Ramses' first acts was to strip the foreign Egyptian Habaru of their wealth and power and expel them en masse. He undertook a campaign to purify Egypt of aliens, just as Akhenaten predicted. The Hebrew Exodus legend refers to that episode. Akhenaten's disciples arranged the evacuation, which the new rulers called rebellion, and dispatched General Seti, who ruled after Ramses as Seti I, to deal with the fleeing heretic rebels. During a chase, his army bogged down in sudden unusual flooding of the Nile Delta. With his pursuing army's heavy chariots immobilized in the flooded marshes, Seti abandoned the hordes of refugees escaping to the Promised Land. Even there they suffered under oppressive 19th dynasty governments. Later the Assyrians, armed with iron swords, overcame them. 8 centuries later, they were defeated again and their most valuable people taken to Babylon as hostages. They were free briefly 150 years later when Cyrus, the first Persian Achaemenid king, defeated Babylon. Soon, however, Greek and Roman conquerors ended Hebrews' elusive freedom. The dream of a promised land remained a dream among a people united by faith, history, and tradition. Centuries of hardship, exile, and oppression imprinted their culture and religion. Hebrew historians recorded their recollections of mythical kings, history, and faith. Their heritage influenced 3 religions: Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. Many know Egyptian heroes only by their Hebrew names: David, Solomon, Isaac, Jacob, Joseph, Moses, and Joshua. In 19th dynasty Egypt, the saga was censured from official Egyptian history to leave only a scornful mention of the mad heretic pharaoh. But 19th century archaeological finds at Akhenaten, Amarna, revealed a different Akhenaten. Egypt suffered from her spiritual wound. She never recovered her glory. The legacies of the ancient crossroads of myths and mysteries and Akhenaten's spiritual reformation survived with the Gnostics, the Essenes, and others. Egyptian wisdom has influenced mystics, prophets, philosophers, and scholars, just as they did Akhenaten and Tutankhamun and their Habaru followers. But what happened to Tutankhamun? Silver asked again. Tutankhamun was assassinated a day after the war with Canaan ended. A popular, just, competent young pharaoh, his death marked the end of Egypt's 18th dynasty. Because his tomb was unmarked and unmentioned, a sign of disrespect, looters never found Tutankhamun's burial treasures. Silver, copper, and tin were saddened, but their new path would soon obviate their sentiment for their old world. Worlds collide. Every civilization starts as a theocracy and ends as a democracy. Victor Hugo. The members of this dreadful new military order consider that they have every right to attack anyone not confessing Christ's name, whereas if they themselves are killed while thus unjustly attacking the pagans, they are called martyrs for the faith. We do not maintain that all they do is wrong, but we do insist that what they are doing can be an occasion of many future evils. Isaac of Etoile, English mystic and Cistercian abbot, a contemporary of Bernard de Clairvaux. The night sky was moonless and dark. The stars flickered faithfully, their distant yet tireless light reminiscent of thousands of and piercing the night sky. The group sat around the opening of the transportal like a troop of scouts around a bonfire. They spent hours reviewing other journeys with their new friends. "I feel lucky to have come across you and to join your mission," Tin said. "I hope that together we will find the universal sign," Copper agreed. "Each of us brings individual natural strengths to the group," Silicone responded hopefully. Hydrogen gazed at the transportal's halo-like lights and asked, "Do you think that's Earth's ka?" "Interesting thought," Silicone began. "Whatever this field of energy is and wherever it comes from, it always seems to be there like some immortal dimension of the planet. Just as Akhenaten described the human ka," said Copper. "But maybe only intelligent complex living organisms have a ka," Oxygen cautioned. "Aren't humans just a bundle of us?" Helium interjected. "Okay, let's assume we're all right. If the Earth's ka is always here and flows unceasingly, then the human ka must be the same. Right? If so, why are humans so confused about their existence? Why their idols, priests, prayers, offerings, and mummifications? Do only the richest see their ka transcend to heaven after they die? Do you remember what I said about the humans' powers, abilities, and self-conscious admiration?" Silicone asked. "Their ego may be one of the reasons they are confused about their origins, their destiny, and their connection to everything around them and the source. Isn't it strange that even though humans are a bundle of us, it seems they cannot acknowledge our presence?" Calcium said. "It's as if they can't detect us. They use us as ornaments, tools, and symbols of wealth, but they don't know what we truly are." "What is wealth?" Nitrogen asked. "Things they own. Objects they fancy," Carbon replied. "They obviously need water, air, and food. They also need to stay warm, comfortable, and safe. Once they have all that, however, they turn to wanting things they consider beautiful or valuable. It is like an unconscious attraction or addiction to the material world. Regrettably so," Gold added, "since they use our kind to put a value on most of those things. And they use me to guard or steal such valuables from each other," Iron added sarcastically. "The desire to own things boosts their sense of self-admiration or purpose, and they will do anything for it." After a period of pensive silence, Silicone said, "I find it curious that the ancient gods' features fit a pattern. There are gods of enlightenment, teaching, and knowledge, as well as gods of war, submission, and order. Also I see common global symbolisms of winged entities, dragon and serpents, eagles or vultures, human skulls, as well as the recurring and 5 insignias. I wonder what all that means. The Egyptian Osiris and the Inca Viracocha are a lot alike," Gold said. "And Azidahaka. What about the Incan Pachacamac, the Mayan Tezcatlipoca, and the Egyptian Seth?" "The Egyptian Ankh signifies life force," Copper said, "and the Egyptian hieroglyphic symbol HR, 5, means to fight or bind. Human histories or legends alternate between benevolence and oppression, granted. But what I find odd," Silicone said, "are the recurring patterns, symbols, and myths among different cultures so widely separated in time and place. Separated by vast distances, ancient humans had little chance to communicate with each other. So how do we explain the remarkable similarity in their imagery and symbolism?" The rising sun reminded them that their journey must continue before they found any answers. The friends looked around to see where the transportal delivered them, and saw a hilltop stone fortress overlooking a beautiful port city. Stone houses and small gardens lined the curved alleys descending the hill below the fortress. At the bottom of the hill, an impressive stone pier jutted into the sea, defining a curved harbor. Around the city, farms of dates, palms, olives, and other fruit lay in neat, checkered squares, watered by irrigation channels fed by clay pipes emerging from invisible wells or aqueducts bringing water from the eastern mountain ranges. Beyond the farms, the terrain turned arid, scarred by dry stream beds. In the distance they spotted a curious sight: rows and rows of tents, men, and horses. The men sat idly under the blazing sun or in the shade of their tents. Nitrogen and helium rose into the air for a better view and informed their companions. "They look like a ragtag army," Nitrogen said. "Tired and dazed, they're sitting aimlessly, clasping their weapons: swords, bows, spears, and shields. I see flags and banners with different patterns and markings, but a white banner with a red cross in the center recurs." "Another end symbol," Helium added. "What else?" Silicon asked. "I see another camp of soldiers in the distance," Nitrogen reported. "They are just as miserable, but their camp looks different. The tents are cones of colorful patterned cloth. The men wear baggy clothes and onion-shaped, pointed helmets. A ravine divides the two camps, and they're keeping a nervous eye on each other across it. There must be a war," Silicon concluded. They had heard of wars but could not understand why humans slaughtered one another. They knew there were often economic motives behind wars, the drive to get each other's wealth or productive energy. Oxygen noted many ships in the port and others anchored off the coast, the port-side ships intricately detailed and beautifully painted with colorfully clothed men on board. Young boys hustled goods to the sailors from the docks. The offshore ships were plain brown wooden vessels flying various flags, always including a white one with a red plus. The water was calm, and the sun had begun its orange descent into the western sea. The friends began to explore the hilltop fortress, an impressive fortification dominating the city's highest point. Formidable masonry walls surrounded it, pierced by gates accessible only from movable aerial walkways spanning water-filled ditches. The town below the walls followed the hill down to the port. The city's population overflowed, women and children sleeping in makeshift tents around the squares and streets, even in yards and gardens, on balconies and the flat rooftops. They looked fearful, hungry, and tired. The children played and cried while their mothers and sisters gazed sadly toward the distant plains, hoping perhaps to spot brothers, husbands, or sons in the distant camps. North and east of the fortress, cliffs of breathtaking inaccessibility presented an awesome challenge to uninvited guests. Corner watchtowers, turrets, and other perimeter defense systems topped the walls, upon which stood men wearing loose red and green shirts and baggy trousers, metal chainmail to their ankles, up-tipped leather boots, and onion-shaped helmets topped with white feathers. They kept careful watch on the distant armies and the flotillas in and out of the harbor. The friends turned into a large central courtyard with a cylindrical tower at the center, the highest point of the fortress complex, overlooking a 360-degree vista of the port city, the distant plains, and the sea. Soldiers filled the courtyard, surrounded by a two-story structure, the guards' barracks and armory. Soldiers in light garments and carrying iron crossbows and longbows guarded a doorway to a subterranean chamber. On the guards' backs hung a weapon, a long black iron tube funneled outward at its end and attached to a V-shaped wooden handle. "I wonder what is in the underground room they are guarding," Calcium said. "And what new killing tool do I see fashioned out of me?" Iron wondered. "Who are you folks?" a voice inquired from inside a soldier's iron tube. "Forgive my intrusion." "I am sulfur." Another voice spoke. "And I am potassium. Together we make the mighty black powder." "Black powder or gunpowder, as you will come to be known. I have heard much about you," Silicon said. "The discovery of what you two can do together changed the human world for the better at times, but more often for the worse." "Regrettably, you are right," Sulfur admitted. "We know what humans value most about us. Here we wait idly until we fuse in an explosion that will take the life force out of a miserable human who has no understanding of what is about to happen to him. Another voice concluded from within a metallic ball in the center of the weapon. And you are lead, the heavyweight and condemned because of it. Can you tell us where we are? You are in one of the recaptured by the Seljuk forces Palestine, or the Kingdom of Jerusalem, depending on whose claim you consider, Sulfur replied. Many battles have been fought to control these coastal lands. For centuries people have lived together here and practiced different faiths, like Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. They became subjects of the Seljuk Empire during the last century. The Seljuk are Muslims by faith but trace their ancestry to the Turkic tribes of the Central Asian steppes. Everyone lived in harmony together until the crusading warriors arrived from the northwest. They poured cities recently in the province of invaded by sea and land, brandishing a red cross and claiming the right to their holy land. Imagine that. They claim it, despite their, or their ancestors, never having set foot here. Inconceivable atrocities came with the ensuing senseless wars. The Crusades. Silicone launched into another portentous recital. For almost 200 years, Christian Europeans and their Byzantine allies fought the increasingly powerful Muslim Turks, expanding into Asia Minor. Centuries earlier, nomadic Turkic tribes organized and united under various rulers and thundered south from their homelands in the northern Asian steppes. The Turkic Seljuk Empire ruled Western Asia between India, China, and Egypt and began to encroach on Byzantine territory in Asia Minor. So grave was the threat that the Byzantine Emperor Alexius I requested help from his Western European rivals in Rome. Pope Urban II was quick to agree. Many have speculated about the Pope's motives in calling for the Holy War of the Cross. Perhaps he hoped to recreate a reunified Holy Roman Empire across Europe. Likely, he hoped to neutralize the violently competing powers of feudal Europe. Regional European kings increasingly defied Rome's authority, levied their own taxes, and waged costly land-grabbing wars that directly and tangibly affected the Vatican's power, influence, and revenues. Independent feudal monarchies vied for power within a Roman Catholic-dominated Western Europe. A truce of God was declared in Europe. The forces of Christendom were reconciled and mobilized against the Muslim barbarians. They accused Muslims of harassing local Christian populations and European pilgrims in the Holy Land. Asian Christians, despite their peaceful coexistence in Palestine and elsewhere, were thrown into the middle of the ensuing conflict. This ancient land, a conflict-ridden crossroads of people, faiths, and armies, had enjoyed an unusual period of harmony and calm for 4 centuries before the Crusades. The period of quiet followed the integration of the region under a new religion. After 661 CE, the Islamic whirlwind stormed out of the nomadic heart of the Arabian desert and swept across Western Asia and Northern Africa. Initially a fanatical, warlike movement, the wisdom of Mesopotamian, Egyptian, and other ancient civilizations of the wider region influenced its development. The Muslim caliphates, established in Damascus, administered an empire Phoenicia, Syria, Palestine, Egypt, Mesopotamia, Persia, North Africa, and Andalusia. Though not always willingly, people learned to live together. Jews and Christians, though not the Persian Zoroastrians, who did not trace their ancient faith to the Old Testament as Christianity and Islam do, were generally tolerated. With its unique geography and history, that intercontinental pivot, the Asian Mediterranean, was notably cosmopolitan. With a mixed population of Jews, Muslims, and Christians, it housed holy pilgrimage sites of all 3 faiths and was an important cultural and religious hub, a progressive coexistence for various people, and there between 1147 and 1149 CE, the armies of the Second Crusade conquered and ransacked the heart of the empire. In the ensuing violent madness, every living creature in the city of Jerusalem was massacred. For days blood streamed from the city's drainage channels. The crusading wars continued for almost 2 centuries and shaped the future political history of Europe and Asia, isolating the Middle East and its people. They also helped guide a backward and superstitious medieval Europe through to an age of enlightenment, the Renaissance, and the Reformation. Pizarro mentioned intolerant, and The Persian, Baghdad, or that spanned historical, place of traditions. That in our second voyage. Silicone paused for a moment. There was commotion in the central square. A small squad of mounted men rode through the gates. With fair skin, hair, and beards, they were tall and stocky. They wore light ceremonial armor and carried large wooden shields adorned with various insignia. They held banners, including the red-crossed white banner. In their midst a red-bearded giant with a golden crown on his head held an ornate golden shield with a red lion in the center. The Seljuk soldiers made way and looked on the passing mounted platoon with amazement, respect, fear, and despise. The horses pranced between lines of standing soldiers and across the cobblestone square. The entire event seemed well choreographed. The men reached the tower and dismounted. The two Seljuk soldiers guarding the door gave way ceremoniously. Two knights accompanied the tall crowned man through the massive iron-gated door and disappeared from view. Their companions sat in a shaded area and helped themselves eagerly to the food and drink laid out for them. The friends and their three new colleagues followed the men into the tower and climbed the steep, spiraling stone stairway into a large circular chamber at the top of the tower, a room designed for military command and defense. All the doors were of heavy iron. Strategically configured windows could be closed quickly, leaving narrow slits for shooting projectiles. The windows looked in every direction. Operable hatch doors over a number of openings on the carved plaster dome let in ventilation and natural light. Beautiful woolen carpets covered the floor, and equally elegant silks draped the walls. A large, intricately carved inlaid table held oil lamps, many books, scrolls, maps, feather pens, and inkwells, as well as fruit and refreshments, all arrayed on a red, gold, and green silk tablecloth. The two knights sat near the entrance, while the crowned man went inside to a stately chair upon which he sat. The room was absolutely quiet, the only sound a canary silently hopping in a brass bird cage hanging in the corner. Even the canary was too nervous to sing. Our friends noticed a man standing by a window, staring at the harbor and the sea beyond. He was a tall, strong man in his early 40s. He had a beard and wore a white, blue, and gold embroidered silk robe and loose pants. His rolled white and blue silk headdress wrapped neatly around a semi-spherical golden cap and flowed around and behind his neck. A curved jewel-studded golden dagger adorned his leather belt. He turned toward his seated guest, bowed slightly, and spoke in fluent Latin. "I welcome you to this castle, but not to this land. I am Al-Nasir Salah al-Din Yusuf ibn Ayyub, the governor of Egypt, Syria, and Palestine, the faithful emissary of the Seljuk court. You may address me as your people do, Saladin." The red-bearded giant responded, "And I am Richard of England, known as Lionheart, and I represent His Holiness the Pope, as well as the Levantine Latin kingdoms and their Christian subjects." An eerie silence fell, as the rivals assessed each other. "Why are you invading our land?" Saladin asked at last. "Why are you here again? Why did you invade the Iberian Peninsula, Sicily, or Malta? Why are you there?" Despite wartime formalities, Saladin diplomatically changed the subject. "I must admit that Lionheart suits you. You are the most competent military commander among the crusading invaders. May I also compliment your military strategy, especially your tactics of distant warfare. One might say we are uncommon leaders in exceptional times. We must devote our minds and hearts, and often the lives of many dear ones, to questionable causes. Men like us often lead incomprehensible lives." Saladin stood silently, looked up, and muttered some kind of short silent prayer. He then glanced at Richard. It was neither a hateful look, nor a challenging stare. Rather, it seemed like a wise gaze that questions the absurdity of human suffering. Richard looked attentively at him. It was a strange brief moment for opposing leaders of such fearsome armadas. "We must discuss ceasefire terms," Richard prompted. "Have you received the Seljuk Emperor's directives?" Saladin smiled. "His lordship trusts my recommendations." "Very well. Let's get on with it." Richard raised his right arm. Instantly, one of his two companions rose and handed him a scroll. What Tin saw next amazed it. Look at the arm of the man, carrying the scroll. There, the embroidery on his shirt sleeve. Our friends recognized what they saw. The embroidery was a shield divided into 4 squares. 2 were marked with the symbol plus, but the other 2 were marked with 5. Below the shield was a human skull superimposed over a pair of crossed human thigh bones. He is wearing the symbols of both Virakaka and Pishikamak, Gold gasped. The 2 men spent the next hour poring over maps. Richard's crusading army was to give up the claim to Jerusalem and the surrounding territories, which Saladin recaptured in 1187 AD. The Latins would retain control of their small coastal Asian kingdoms. Christians could live and make pilgrimages to Jerusalem and other holy sites. The Seljuk navy would escort the Latin navy out to sea for insurance and protection. Hostilities were to cease for 5 years. The Christian colonists would cease raiding the Seljuk lands, towns, and merchant caravans. Although, both Saladin and Richard suspected the conflict would persist, providing plenty of pretexts for retaliation. Silicone took advantage of the negotiations to explain. Richard and Saladin know that Saladin's struggles are far from over. This is no truce but only a cessation of hostilities between their armies. Richard's army is withdrawing from the ongoing regional conflict, in effect abandoning the war he came to fight. And Saladin knows it. But, why would he do that, Potassium asked, when he has recaptured several coastal towns? Maybe he's homesick, Helium humored. You're both right. Richard won some victories, but Saladin's tiresome strategy of avoiding head-on engagements has worn him down. Saladin bides his time, exhausts his foe's resources, and waits for a strategically opportune time to invest his army. Saladin knew that the northern Europeans would have trouble with the hot, dry climate, and the Seljuk naval blockade of supply routes. Time was on his side. His men were defending their homes and families and were better supplied. Saladin conducted a war of attrition, denying Richard the quick decisive war he wanted. Time was not on his side. Richard had started the Third Crusade in conjunction with the armies of the French King Philip Augustus and the remaining troops of the German King Frederick Barbarossa, who drowned in a Solution river. But Richard took a long time to reach Asia, since he stopped to help take the western Iberian Peninsula back from Muslim Moorish forces to form the Kingdom of Portugal. Later he took Cyprus away from its Byzantine ruler because he insulted his fiancée. He reached the eastern Mediterranean to confront intense local summer heat, few remaining German forces, and an unreliable French king, who departed soon after the bloody conquest of Acre. After that Richard had to manage the regional squabbles over kingship, power, and politics with a smaller army. More important, he learned his brother John had rebelled in consolidating alliances and outnumbered followers, including the English folk hero Robin Hood. Richard recognized the urgency of going home to deal with his own problems. At this point, Saladin and Richard rose and walked to the window overlooking the harbor. They knew they were responsible for many lives. Could they reach their goals without further bloodshed? Your reputation has spread throughout Europe, Richard said. You have become a legend of sorts. That is encouraging. The church denounces the Muslims, but the veteran crusaders tell a different story. Some people understand that the infidel Oriental is neither evil nor decadent, not too unlike Europeans. Just ordinary humans with the same needs, confusions, fears, and hopes. I know that you protect civilians and prisoners, even offering to pay for their return home. You know we are short on provisions, so we execute the wounded prisoners and other useless mouths. You slaughtered 3,000 Muslim women and children at Acre. Were they useless? Could you not let them go, so we could feed them? Richard did not answer. I seek understanding between our peoples. War serves no good purpose. England was busily fighting Richard's. You speak wisely, Richard replied. Some question Rome's holy wars. Others tell of mysterious discoveries in the Holy Land. What do you mean? I will tell you, the Englishman said, but first I want to ask you some questions. What we say, you must never reveal. Saladin nodded in agreement. Very well then. Explain the attack withdrawal tactics you beat my cavalry with. The Parthians used them against the Romans. The Parthian light cavalry were skilled mounted archers and engaged their enemies from a distance. They attacked with a fraction of their cavalry, and then withdrew as if in retreat. As soon as some distance separated them from their enemy, reinforcements rushed in for an ambush. The Parthians could shoot backwards with deadly accuracy at a full gallop. Our cavalry does well on long-distance mountainous terrains, but heavy armor-clad European knights in the First Crusade. We learned. Your heavy armor and weapons cripple an army in a prolonged engagement in a hot climate. You're right about the climate and your tactics, Richard conceded. The knights who rode out too far never came back. Why are your thin swords so strong? If our blacksmiths made such thin blades, we could use them only for roasting chickens. Saladin smiled. That, my honored guest. I cannot tell you. One must first learn our alchemist's secrets. Saladin paused to ask for some fresh mint tea for them. Silicone took the opportunity to explain. The two worlds learned much from each other. The Europeans, younger and more isolated, learned from expeditions in arid and failed to stop the galloping their neighbors' culture, science, and philosophy. The Seljuk blacksmiths knew how to mix ratios of pure cooked coal powder our friend carbon here to make lighter, stronger steel weapons, armor, and gun barrels. Iron and carbon looked at each other. They knew they were stronger together. Tell me about your guns and your explosive weapons. Grenades and guns. Saladin crowed. We learned about them from the Chinese, and improved them. They use an incendiary powder, whose exact composition is a secret. I also have heard of your ancient maps that show lands we know nothing about, far away seas beyond the end of the inhabited world, where only dragons and demons roam. Saladin laughed. What rubbish. There are such maps. I have seen them. They show a continent far to the west and a great island continent in the far south. Despite their accuracies, some of the maps have recurring geographical inconsistencies. The world they represent was different from the one we know. They show dry land where we know seas, and solid land where there are now only islands. It's as if the seas were lower then. The Great Library of Alexandria had many such maps and charts and obscure manuscripts, but the Roman Church unleashed their mobs to destroy it. Valuable treasures vanished forever. The establishment continues to destroy ancient knowledge. The Eastern Christians of Byzantium are not so perverse. The Western Catholics are sunk in ignorance, superstition, and prejudice. But for the Muslim scholars, even Greek literature and philosophy would have disappeared. Ironically, Rome has opened Pandora's box, Richard said bitterly. It has already had to yield. Catholic precious yield? To whom? Saladin asked. The Knights Templar. Oh, yes, Saladin said. The poor knights? They're far from poor. They swarm the holy sites in and around Jerusalem. When we recaptured Jerusalem, they sent a secret emissary. They claimed to be a secret brotherhood, only nominally loyal to Rome. They sought an arrangement whereby their scholars could continue studying the ancient sites, monasteries, and religious centers. From the start of the First Crusade, some of the French nobility, notably the court of Champagne, had an agenda before they got to Jerusalem. When Jerusalem fell in the Second Crusade, Bernard of Clairvaux capitalized on public sympathy for a ragtag militia under Hugues de Payens that protected Christian pilgrims. They were known as the Poor Knights because they could afford neither armor nor servants like the aristocratic knights. Saint Bernard led them to make an agreement with the new kingdom of Jerusalem. Hence headquartered on the site of Solomon's Temple of Solomon, they called themselves the Knights of the Temple or the Knights Templar. They secretly excavated the ruins of Solomon's Temple. What they found, nobody knows. Does no one know? Saladin asked. Some say they took what they found and hid them among heretics like the French Cathar. Nobody knows what was discovered, but we do know what it did for the poor knights. 9 Templar leaders met secretly with a papal council in Troyes, and walked out with unheard of concessions and privileges, grants of land all over Europe and the Levant, the right to finance and protect Christians pilgrims and no taxes whatsoever. They got the right to maintain a militia, accountable only to themselves. They walked out as an autonomous power with lands to rule, armies to keep, profitable operations to run, paying no taxes to anyone. Clearly, whatever they found in Jerusalem was so controversial that Rome had to make a deal. The Templars agreed to silence in exchange for their remarkable privileges. "Is that why you came here?" Saladin asked. "Are you their ally?" "I can tell you only that they are not happy that you recaptured Jerusalem and the other holy sites. You're costing them money." At that moment, Saladin walked away with one of his men, who had come to whisper something to him. "What happened to the Knights Templar?" Hydrogen asked. "That answer requires a long discussion," Silicone said. "But I'll tell you what is relevant to us. After the Second Crusade, many remained in the newly established Christian kingdoms whose Muslim and Jewish citizens were slaughtered. They profited from trade between Asia and Europe, and often looted Silk Road caravans. They built strategically located fortifications for local defense and deployment of armored knight brigades. Saint Bernard recognized the need for more professional military resources, crusading monks, fighting work with a cross in one hand, and a sword in the other. The armies of Islam had a similar religion-infused fighting philosophy, the jihad. Christian edicts glorified and legitimized the warriors of Christ, turning crusader mercenaries into folk heroes. Donations and concessions poured in from the Vatican, kings, merchants, and common folks for these protectors of the Holy Land. The militant orders' fortified monasteries spread across the Levant and Europe. Inevitably, their power and wealth attracted investment from European elite, creating Europe's first international commercial and promoted the idea of the religious warriors who did God's and financial enterprises. The orders soon had financial, commercial, military, and political reach throughout the Levant and Europe. By the time of Saladin, the Templars and the Hospitaller owned almost half the Latin Levant. Others soon copied them. The Germanic order of Teutonic Knights played a major role in the Baltic Crusades that led to the creation of the Catholic nations of Prussia, Poland, and the Baltic nations. It was the Teutonic Knights' brutal surprise raiding parties into these previously pagan lands, which inspired such old folkloric tales as the metaphorical imagery of helmeted knights conducting surprise raids out of foggy forests. These soldiers of God invented a new type of entity, whose lifeline no longer depended on national and religious affiliations. Such military religious orders developed private international soldiery, trade, finance, and land and capital ownership. Indeed, it proved to be a very powerful and lucrative existence. The Levantine orders were eventually dislodged from their Asian territories by Saladin, and later his Ayyubid descendants and the Egyptian Memluk. In the early 14th century, the Ottomans captured the last eastern stronghold of the Hospitallers in Rhodes and Cyprus. The 14th century marked the beginning of the political perhaps, 1307 AD, Pope Clement V outlawed the Templars, declaring them as heretics and devil worshippers. Many were burned at the stake. But, some of the Templars fled, or henceforth operated under different incarnations. Throughout most of Catholic Europe, their lands were confiscated. The Templars spirited away money, treasures, relics, and secret traditions to safer havens like Scotland. Some of the Templar relics are believed to be still hidden in Scottish sanctuaries. Others reincarnated headless, faceless, horsemen armored, and decline of Vatican's Holy Roman Empire. To consolidate their European influence, in Portugal as the Order of Christ. Throughout the 15th century, under the rule of their enigmatic Grand Master, Emperor Henry the Navigator, the Portuguese famously circumnavigated Africa, finding a marine route to Asia, and created a colonial trading and slaving empire. Also, the Order of Christ facilitated the discovery of the New World. Their possession of ancient navigational charts finding and exploration of following their African, was instrumental to the American continent. Asian, and American colonization ventures, the Order of Christ was famed to have become the richest enterprise in Europe. While the Templars were persecuted, Rome allied itself to some other military religious orders, such as the Order of Christ and the Hospitallers. After the loss of the Holy Land, the Hospitallers fled to Cyprus, Rhodes, and a few smaller Aegean islands. After the fall of Rhodes and Cyprus to the Ottomans, they moved to Malta under the new name of the Knights of the Order of St. John, better known as the Knights of Malta. They have been Vatican's loyal agents ever since. These surviving religious military orders Catholic nations of Spain, profited from within the Portugal, Malta, and the merchant Italian city-states, and effectively controlled European trade for over a century. By then, these orders had adopted ruthless greed, exploitation, and autocracy. No profitable activity was overlooked, even smuggling, piracy, and slave trading. Increasing competition between the seafaring Protestant Northern Europeans and the Catholic lands brought rivalry and war. It was the descendants of the exiled English Templars that raised the infamous skull and bones flags atop their pirate ships. At that moment, Saladin returned and invited Richard to a table lavishly set with various dishes. "Your Pope," Saladin said as Richard ate, "should know that the Templars will have no special privileges, just the same safe access as all other Christians." Richard laughed so loudly that some food spewed out of his mouth. "Richard, sorry. I laugh because it's rather grander than that." Ironically, Rome's attempt to control Europe has diminished its power and influence for good. The Templars and their allies are sworn to undo the Vatican's influence and what they see as the Church's deliberate distortion of the historical truth behind Christianity and Jesus Christ. But tell me, we seem to be behind the Asians in many ways. Spices, herbs, fruits, and vegetables, paper, color dyes, alchemy, metalworking, gunpowder, navigational charts, fine textiles, mathematics, sciences, medicine, and astronomy. Apparently, we surpass you mostly in fighting and religion. When I got here, I saw the difference with the Christians here. They bathe often, use incense, wear fine clothes, eat well, and live in fine villas. They even recite poetry for us at night." Richard and his companion laughed scornfully, but not Saladin. A taste for such luxuries started these wars. Greed. The Muslim and Byzantine merchants stand in the way of the Holy Roman Empire's aim to dominate the Asian and African trade in spices, silk, ivory, and color dyes, all so precious in Europe. Once they lose their foothold here, they will find other ways to get at what they want. One wonders why Europe is so greedy, since its land is blessed with much water. Indeed, our crops often exceed our needs. We eat well, but we spend a lot of time doing the bidding of the Roman Church. Why is that? Europe, Richard replied, is isolated. Unlike Asia, we have no long history of races and nations mingling and learning from each other. Dense forests cover much of Europe. So in order to farm, we have to cut lots of trees. We got strong, durable iron tools, sharp enough to cut trees only when Rome colonized northern Europe. Before that most Europeans were hunter-gatherer warriors and knew little about the rest of the world. Yes, Saladin said, our agriculture suffers from lack of water. Ancient records tell us that it used to rain much more here. There were more rivers, lakes, and forests in Syria, Mesopotamia, Persia, and Central Asia. Now much of that is arid plains and desert. Our world has dried up. Our people invent new ways to manage water and develop dry land crops. Famines cause invasion and migration all over Asia. Richard mumbled, yes, that is a problem for the local Christian kingdoms as well. Saladin had another question for his guest. Islam learns from both the Old and New Testaments, yet Jews and Christians do not accept Islam. But why do Christians persecute Jews? Why did the Christians massacre Jews along with Muslims when they captured Jerusalem? The Church blames the Jews for persecuting Jesus. And Jews do not recognize Jesus as the Messiah. Well, Saladin rejoined, Christians reject the newer Islam. But, why blame the Jews for hanging onto their beliefs? If we all mean the same one God, then the Creator's word should be the same in any language and faith. Why are your Gospels true, and everything else false? Why force your beliefs down people's throats? Richard offered no answer, only grabbing the red cross on his shirt. He changed the subject. In Palestine, we visited the Coptic monasteries. The crosses that adorn their churches are different from ours. How so? Their early Christian crosses were often composed of a circle above the cross, flanked by stretched wings, and crowned by a crescent moon. I know little about mythology or spiritual history, Saladin said, but I can tell you that the winged disk and the crescent moon are ancient symbols many share in Mesopotamia, Persia, Egypt, and other places. They say it has something to do with the ancient pagans' abode of the gods. The cross with a circle on top is an Egyptian hieroglyph called Ankh, which means life or life force. The Sumerians also used the cross as a holy symbol. Your cross probably derived from such sacred symbols of ancient Mesopotamia and Egypt. Their origin, true message, and age defy all our knowledge. You Christians do not seem to fully grasp what it is that you so devotedly worship. Well, neither do we. But does anyone? We revere the cross because Jesus died on one. Saladin shook his head and smiled. Earlier, you mentioned about the Greeks' literary works, that have been translated into Arabic. What kind of books are these? Saladin, almost as grand as the maps and charts that you fancy. Many have already been brought into Europe by the likes of your Templar scholars. The genie is already out of the bottle, Sahib. Our worlds have collided. The two foes approached the circular tower's windows, overlooking a quiet hillside port city, and the opposing tented camps in the distance. As their two-world stalemate was brought back to life by the brightening dawn sky, they knew their encounter had already brought great change. As for our friends, the rising sun signaled their departure.